Back SMITE fans to the SMITE Pro League powered by Alienware, but Alienware is not the only title sponsor that the SMITE Pros have to their name, and in fact, you can actually get some sick gear for your rear, as Dulcin's mother would like to say, with the Maxnomic. Just make sure all you have to do is plug the SMITE Max code, and then you too can sit in the ultimate comfort with one of the most premium SMITE Maxnomic chairs. And if that video didn't give you any idea, Mifflin will in fact help you build your chair. He might even do all the heavy lifting for you. Isn't that right, Mifflin?
Well, I did do all the heavy lifting for that chair. I tell you what, chat, for a small premium fee that we will discuss in my personal Twitter DMs, I might potentially consider the idea of coming out to your home and building the chair for you. Potentially, maybe.
And I swear, we didn't just bring Mifflin on the desk for me to tell you guys about how he's going to build your SMITE Maxnomic chair for you. He'll, in fact, be joining us for that Olympus Bolts versus Camelot King set that we've got coming up next here, Mifflin. And based off of the schedule for today, this is definitely our second set of the day. But not only that, Olympus Bolts, Camelot Kings, these two have definitely been going head-to-head for quite some time since Split 1. It'll definitely be exciting to see how they fare against each other here now in Split 2 with these midseason changes having taken place. And the most important part about this set, Mifflin, is the fact that one of these teams will remain at the top there with the Atlantis Leviathans, and one has to fall just a step lower.
Just a step, but not too far. There's not overly too much on the line here, but I think that this is going to be a very interesting set. Both of these teams have had a similar narrative path here in Season 8. The Olympus Bolts, everyone kind of expected them coming into this season to be maybe 4th seed, 3rd seed, kind of that middle of the pack top runner there, and the same could be said of the Camelot Kings, but as the year has gone on, the Bolts have really been climbing throughout the standings, and as have the Camelot Kings. So both squads here, dark horses for the Season 8 of SPL, but both teams really stepping up to the plate.
And for what it's worth, Mifflin, I think that this first set of the Jade Dragons versus Atlantis Leviathans kind of foreshadowed the fact that mid lane is an ever-growing presence here with some of these mid-season changes. And as for Veneno, he's certainly got his work cut out for him up against the likes of Big Man Tings.
Yeah, Big Man Tings, one of the OG premier role players, is what he used to be hailed as inside of the mid lane. One of those guys who would never cost you a game, always consistently good, but maybe not rising to the levels of top tier. But here in Season 8, I am not going out on a limb. It's not a hot take. There's nothing spicy about what's about to come out of my mouth. Big Man Tings is real good, Taco. He is consistently topping the damage charts, has a incredibly deep god pool, has been facilitating a lot of the kills for his teams, and I think it's been due in large fact to his very willing propensity to play around these side lanes. A lot of these mid laners like to just sit in the center of the map, soak up farm, go to the back camp, soak up that farm too, and just kind of out-farm everybody on the map, a la Shinto style. No, Big Man Tings is trying to be a jungler just with a mage tree.
Well, you certainly had a lot to say about Big Man Tings there, Mifflin, but as far as Veneno is concerned...
Oh, are we talking about Ben? Oh, God.
How would you gauge Veneno in this matchup?
Everything I just said, but Ven.
Times two.
Yeah, times 2. Ven's so good. Remember what he did to the Salty Tower boy? Wasn't that awesome? Ven, you're really good, bud. I didn't mean to go over your segment here. I got confused. Taco threw it to me weird. I'm going to go ahead and drop all semblance of...
Silence,
Oh, okay,
Mifflin.
yeah, go ahead.
We've got the brain, the brawn, the power, Veneno, mid laner for the Olympus Bolts. Ben, how you feeling after that gas up speech that Mifflin just gave you?
You're nuts, dude.
Oh, it was good, yeah. Oh, I liked it. It was nice.
I think Mifflin's just jealous because he's never had an opportunity to taste one of your world-famous burgers. So grilling status, we know that you were a master, but how are you feeling with some of these mid-season changes for that mid-lane role?
Yeah, I'm feeling good about it. I've been playing a lot of Smite recently, so with the new patch and everything like that. So I'm pretty excited to see what SPL brings and if it differs from scrims and stuff like that.
And as far as the scrim environment is concerned, do you think that is detrimental at all if things aren't necessarily going your team's way, or is it just something to keep in mind as you work through your actual live sets?
I mean, scrims are there to learn. I mean, you just want to learn as much as you can, as fast as you can in scrims. And I mean, I have a great team behind me that is very serious in scrims and wants to learn as much as they can. So I'm definitely happy with what we've practiced so far.
Well, seems as though you've certainly been level-headed about the whole ordeal. And again, thank you so much for joining us for the pregame interview. And we'll have a little chat with Mifflin later on, all right? I don't know if he necessarily gave you the intro that you deserve.
That's all right. No problem.
Love you, Ben.
I love you too.
Have a good one, Ben. Good luck with your
Have a good one.
Saturday. Oh, man. Oh, Mifflin, this is going to come back to you somehow. This is almost going to be like the 45K you just lost the other day.
Why you gotta bring that back up? Hey, look, use code Mifflin. That's where you're gonna get your $5. Chat. Do I talk about Ben now, or do I just continue the BMT hype?
I think you have to just go into the BMT hype because you certainly already had a lot to say on the matter. But it's in your defense, Mifflin. Big Man Tings has definitely been a star power force for this Camelot Kings roster, and it's hard to believe that he's been doing all of this from Europe.
Yeah, he's been playing on a fair bit of ping here. I kind of want to talk about Ben now, Taco. I'm feeling kind of bad about it. But sure, I could do BMT again. It's been a little bit since I did my spiel. Maybe they forgot a fair bit of it. BMT used to be a role player. I can't do the exact same thing again. Now, one of the premier mid laners here has a very diverse god pool. Look, has been playing on ping, and it doesn't seem to be affecting him too awfully. But chat's already heard what I've got to say about this guy, Taco. Take it away.
To be fair, all the things you said can never really speak enough for the level of prowess that I think Big Man Tings is capable of in this mid lane position. And the most impressive part by far is that he is definitely a very flexible player, having once played frontline back in Season 2 days, I believe, with Team Dignitas.
Callback.
I think that Big Man Tings is just someone who has that strong consistency factor, Mifflin, that you were discussing, and I think that that's what's going to pose the biggest challenge here today for the Olympus Bolts, is because Camelot Kings, they're not necessarily a roster that's going to do the most flashy of performances, but they're definitely going to be smart and very precise with their initiations, and Big Man Tings, of course, a big driving force behind that in the mid lane.
Yeah, to speak to your point, generally when we talk about players that are going to single-handedly change the face of the game, these star players, these guys who have the capacity to line up and just be that name force for your squad, don't generally have that level of consistency. For example, one of the best to have ever done it, who's some of the highest peaks of SMITE gameplay we've ever seen, Cyclone Spin, has occasionally had some couple of weak stints or maybe a split or two where he has a slightly more quiet performance. The same can be said of a Dap King or Game Hunter in the way back when. You want to go even further, we could talk about Shadow Nightmare. All these guys have incredibly high peaks, but they've got low valleys as well. I would say BMT, on his worst day, is blanket statement good. He's just good on his worst day, and that's a great asset to have.
Nice peak yawn performance there out of Captain Twig on the big screen. I know that he's loving that one, but what I'm about to love, Mifflin, is how these drafts are going to shake up between these two squads, because I do feel as though Big Man Tings and Venenu are relatively similar. They both have very flexible god pools, don't get me wrong, but there is a lot of overlapping in terms of what they prefer.
Yeah, the Raijins, the Merlins, the Yanis's, things along those lines. Sure, there's a couple of picks that you would maybe only associate with one. For example, BMT, a little bit more likely to go towards things like that Agni and the Ra, some of those OG picks. So we'll see how that shakes out in the bans. But this is the first time the Kings and the Bolts both have played on this no boots patch. So there is some pretty large shifts inside the meta. That said, we're already starting to see some of the bans that have been ringing true for the last couple of weeks do the exact same here. Raijin, Soul, and Gilgamesh taken off the table.
And it makes sense. Kings don't want to allow any of the flex pick opportunities. Soul and Gilgamesh, incredibly versatile for that Bolts roster. You can't really ever be too sure who's taking what, given the fact that there are so many interchangeable god pick selections for the Bolts. But Bolts definitely taking some time here. We have seen a lot of ban preference against the Kings in terms of their front line, but it seems as though the Bolts are just taking full shots, trying to throw Tings onto something a little bit more uncomfortable.
Yeah, Ben heard me gas up Tings way too much there for his liking. Said, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to shut this guy down before he's even allowed to pick his god. Mid laners getting banned out across the board, but the Kings not too concerned about it. Instead, going to toss their ban over there towards Fenrir, targeting both support and jungle.
Bolts just said, Tings, you're playing something wild here today, man, because Tiamat, Giannis, Raijin, so much magical burst damage presence already eliminated, and that does give Kings the opportunity to just take a prime support choice here for Genetics. Amir, arguably one of his best supports, and certainly introduces a level of separation that could be problematic for the Bolts in team fights.
I am surprised to see them go ahead and go for the Ymir in that first slot, considering how much emphasis has already been on mid laners in the bans. You'd think they'd want to get their pick of the litter of what's left here, and especially considering there are plenty of supports that are still available, plenty of really good gods. I mean, Fafnir is still out there, Yamoja's still available as well, but instead Genetics is going to go towards this Ymir in that first slot, and you already bring up how good he is on this pick, but even here with the vines being gone, well, you got to make even more walls for yourselves now. Ymir maybe getting a slight buff insofar as that. Bolts, though, are going to take their mid laner in that first slot, and it's a very high execution mid laner. Morrigan locked in.
But this is by far probably one of Venenu's specialty picks. If Kings are going to bring out the best of the best for their roster, it's only fair that we see similar fashion response from the Bolts. And Morrigan is quite a statement piece to lock in this early on. Typically, Morrigan probably a little bit more better reserved for that third pick or even fourth and fifth. You generally want an idea of what the opposition is taking, just in case you might have any prime options. She can be a little bit of a counter pick option, but with Morrigan now being taken up by the Bolts, that I do think that's going to influence the Kings in terms of their rest of their composition, because they don't want to let Venenu have any ideal transformations.
Yeah, for example, normally when you wait a little bit longer into the draft for Morrigan, it means you're going to have a little bit of additional safety up against the enemy composition. If the Kings so elect, they can go towards dot damage to deal with that stealth, something along those lines, just to make sure that she isn't able to just maneuver freely amongst the backline. That isn't going to be the adaptation that we've seen so far, but there is a cheeky good matchup here. Chiron, if he applies his damage to the Morrigan, can wait for the stealth, use that second ability, all of a sudden she's not invisible anymore.
But if we learned anything from that first set today, Mifflin, it's that Odin Cage can certainly be a nuisance. And against the top three that the Kings have opted for, there is potentially here, yeah, that we could even see two Odin Cages back to back. So even if the Kings were to opt for something like the Phantom, it's that subconscious threat that's going to possibly force the Kings to be a little bit more reserved in their early to mid-game gameplay, which could be problematic for gods that are so early to mid-game dependent.
Yeah, I do really like this Odin pick. Has great limiting factors up against this King's draft. Ymir, Erlang Shen, and Chiron. Not a single one of those guys able to deal with that cage. We saw earlier today in that last set what exactly Odin, or Finoke rather, was able to do to Chiron with this pick. Just dominance. I mean, there's not much else to say about it. Could dictate an early Phantom pickup if this Odin wants to. Has the potential to flex as well. Could go into the soul lane. Has potential to go into the jungle. I'm very excited to see what the Bolts do with this one. There's one thing I can foresee very easily in the King's future. It's probably going to be a Phantom pickup.
Curious, though, what Barracuda decides to pilot here. There is an opportunity, if he's just looking for pure survivability, to maybe look into locking a Jing Wei, since she has such a strong escape away from the likes of Ymir and Erlang Shen. Erlang's knockup even going to be a little bit ineffective, given the fact that Jing Wei can just agility away should Erlang ever look to try and be aggressive against her. But there is still also the likes of a Medusa, even though there is mild concern with the Ymir walls that Petrify gets cut short.
Yeah, look, Taka, I gotta ask you about it. You're the ADC main here. You grind the role. Zapman's not in this lobby. Why am I looking at an Artemis ban?
You're looking at an Artemis ban because Barracuda would be a menace on that Artemis otherwise. With the midseason changes having taken place, I don't know if you got a chance to look at what Panicat was building last game, but I have a feeling we would have seen an incredibly similar build for that on Barracuda, just given the circumstance that Artemis has such a strong attack speed steroid with her second ability. Not only that, but the Vengeful Assault that recent buffs to her. I just think that it's a little bit too much poke damage, very problematic for such immobile characters like the Ymir, and then having that possible team fight inside of the Odin cage would be a nightmare. But it seems as though Barracuda is still going to get an ideal hunter pick selection here. He's going for the blind, and Shivalanke is someone we haven't seen in quite some time, Mifflin.
No, especially at the SPL level. We've seen him a little bit over in the SCC. Meerkat jumps out to mind as one of the guys who loves playing this god when he was playing that hunter role. Now, not really nearly as much, but Shibalanke has great damage output, could go towards the Death Toll if he's worried about sustaining his mana in lane, branching Bola. Essentially a free ability to use nowadays, so I do like this pick for him, and just as you already highlighted, does have that global presence. Is it fair to call it global presence? Global blind, if you would, from the X-Ball out of the ADC role. It's going to make it a little bit harder for Chiron to select his shots with the Centaurus. He uses that for that death immunity. Well, all of a sudden you can't see anybody. You're probably not going to be able to revive off of it. I like this pick, but it is spicy. It's new. It's not what we're used to seeing.
You might be surprised how that Xbalanque versus Chiron 1v1 actually shakes up, because the poison darts along with that rising Jaguar, definitely a pretty potent combination. Not only that, but the branching Bola and some of these mid-season changes. Xbalanque having an opportunity to build solely powered, just funneling even more so into his passive. He might be swinging a lot harder than what anyone from the Kings is expecting, and I think it's fair to label it as a global presence, not even necessarily just a global blind, just because of the fact that inside of that Odin cage, you also have to factor in that the Xbalanque is going to be able to kind of limit how much early game aggression we see here from the Kings. And Kings, they came right off the bat. Amir, Erlang, Chiron, they definitely want the early game focus, but how do you control a team fight when you can't see what's going on?
Wait for the blind to go away more than likely, right? It's
get
not the
free casted
longest
on?
blind. Fair enough, and from further away, because he gets that additional range on his auto attacks, the Bolts do have themselves a pretty dive-heavy composition themselves as well. Fafnir, Odin, even Camazot's going to be able to work their way into the back line, and the Morrigan, once she turns into that Odin or that Camazot's going to be able to do the exact same thing. The Kings, though, have drafted themselves a lot of aggression out of that duo lane. Ymir with the Frostbite passive is going to clear out these camps expeditiously. We've seen what Chiron's able to do with that Bluestone Transcendence, start the damage output absolutely ridiculous pre-5, and doesn't really slow down post-5 either. I like both of these drafts, but it feels like to me the Kings have a much more standard composition here. That's standard Smite through and through. You've got an early game aggressive jungler. You've got decent scaling out of the mid lane, whereas the Bolts have a kind of execution heavy draft. You can say that about any team composition that has the Morrigan in it. If she falls behind early, so hard to work your way back in. But I could trust Ven to do well. I didn't get a chance to talk about him earlier on, but we could go ahead and say, man's pretty good at Smite. I trust him to play the god.
Not only that, but starting to think that there is a strong possibility here that we could be seeing a double Camazot's dive potential from the Bolts. And Mifflin, while I think it's still a little bit vague, because it could possibly still be Odin in the jungle, although I'm willing, I think it's a lot more certain that it's going to be Odin solo, but either way, Camazot certainly has a lot of early to mid game pressure as well, and especially when you factor in that the Bolts can kind of just work through the chaos of that global blind from the Xbalanque Darkest Nights. Do you think that that is going to force some early rotations from the solo lane to maybe try and help alleviate some of that mid game pressure?
We have seen a little bit more of an emphasis of early solo rotations going off of the one set we've seen so far post-patch. I think that we could see it come through, but neither one of these teams, I think, is really on a timer for their solo laners. They don't really need to farm up too much. Instead, could start to rotate out a little bit earlier on. It's whether or not the team that is rotating feels confident enough to start up that gold for you. Whichever side establishes duo dominance, I think is going to have their solo laner leaving the lane a little bit earlier on. But it's hard to say. It's such a new patch, it's a new map, essentially. The meta is not established just yet, neither are the builds. I'm just excited to watch them smite.
And Mifflin, you have a lot of jungle experience with your Smite history. As far as the Camazot's into Merlin matchup is concerned, how does that one tend to go?
You want to blink in, hit Vampiric Bats, he flickers away. Oh well, you're kind of slowed, bud. Use your leap to chase him down, and then you can remove yourself from the playfield. Generally, junglers struggle against Merlin because he's got so much damage output. The turnaround potential from him is so high, but not all junglers are able to legitimately leave the playfield and then simultaneously deal damage to you. Camazot's can do exactly that with Bat Out of Hell. It's a good matchup for him, but it's not overly good. It's not so much so that the Merlin has to feel under threat of this Camazot's consistently if he's able to remain afloat. Fall behind Merlin, you're going to be behind the entire game. That's just kind of how it goes.
And I think that might be Venenu's idea from the get-go, given that he does have that changeling opportunity to look for the double Bat Out of Hells, the double Vampiric Bats, even that giant leap. It seems like it grows further the closer to kill range someone is, and that I think that's just the Camazot's exclusive. But also, Mifflin, looking at this Odin and how it works with the rest of the Bolt composition, we got really excited seeing the Odin pick because of the fact that there was Chiron, Erlang, and Amir on the top picks. But I feel like the 4th and 5th pick selections here from the Kings still kind of playing into this Odin, but if there is not as much early game presence. Maybe it doesn't work out as well for the Odin. Either way, we'll get a chance to find out how the Bolts fare up against the Camelot Kings. We've got game number 1 and Dolson and Gore to take it away.
Thank you, Taco and Mifflin on the desk. Camelot Kings versus Olympus Bolts, game number 1. Brought to you by Dolson, Gormizer, and of course Doug working the camera for us here for game number 1, game number 2, potentially game number 3, depending on how this one goes. Gore, what an exciting day to come back here in Phase 2 of Season 8 of the SPL. So many changes, no more boots. The map looks a little bit different. And it's so fun, I think, to watch these teams figure out what the new meta looks like, what item builds start to look like. A lot of that is still going on as we are playing these games right now. And so I think there's some extra intrigue sprinkled in this weekend.
I mean, we live in a world where Artemis and Baba Yaga were banned this game. I mean, just try to drop that into Season 7, 6, 5, 4, maybe 3. Like, there's a certain point where all of a sudden, well, Baba Yaga at a certain point just didn't exist there, but their Artemis just hasn't really been as competitively viable as some of these others. And then, of course, Xbalanque gets blocked in. I mean, Barra is on something today.
I think Artemis is always competitively viable in my rank because everyone stands on top of one another, and the board just eats everyone, and you can't fight out of it.
Tusky gets his job done. Yeah, there you go.
It's always been viable, at least at that level. And outside of the X-Ball, somewhat standard in what we've seen here in drafts over in the duo lane. Got a Fafnir, a Ymir, a Chiron that's been super popular even before the current update now has come through. No surprise, though, early on, Gormizer, that the Ymir and the Chiron forcing Barra and Jake back a little bit.
Yeah, this is something like Xbalanque for the longest time, and honestly, I think even still has never been regarded as an early game god, and Fafnir isn't necessarily going to have the same amount of control. You know what? He's just not. There's no way he's going to have the same amount of control as Ymir should this early on. I think this is a lane for genetics to kind of dictate the pace as he sets it for the next few minutes. As they hit level 5, you'll maybe start to see Barra get a little more ambitious, having that blind, not just the blind, but this is something that gets overlooked very often. The extension on the range of the autos for a Xbalanque, all of a sudden you're able to start hitting people who are under the tower without having to put yourself in jeopardy. It becomes a little bit more of a game of minds at that point. That's why I'm excited to see it, because Xbalanque, not the first time we've seen him this year. The first time was Cyclone Spin in week 1. I think it was the first set that was played for the SPL. But this will be the first time that we might get to see it in a more standard position.
Agreed. Now, I think along a similar vein is this Odin here, Gormizer,
this is the second game this year,
where we haven't seen that much, starting to see a little bit more play. And with the differences in build paths, thanks to the boots, we maybe start to see a little bit of a difference in starter builds here as well. Normally, it's mask or starter, move into your build after that, and then if you get a mask, you get a starter a little bit later on. Haddox here on the Odin wants both.
Says, yeah, I mean, hey, if you can get the best of both worlds, absolutely, and it's cost efficient for him, it's going to be working out. And so far, he's had a decent amount of control over here. I mean, we just heard Julio kind of say in his interview, like, hey, I can't kill them, but also they can't kill me.
There's an engagement happening over by the blue buff. Captain Twig's got some early game damage, but Haddox with the body blocks, Haddox with the stun. And now Captain Twig will run away, but Haddox has got the up-down variety. He extends in, and he's already used its transformation. Now he's going to get run down, and the Olympus Bolts get gifted a free 2 kills.
I mean, the first one that comes there, that's beautiful body blocks. Like, Haddox just played that better than anything. That is good team synergy, and that is a great way to showcase what your solo laner can do for you early on. But the second one, it felt like a little bit of lag, like Twig saying, hey, I got him, go get the last hit. And then they kind of forgot it's Camazot's. He healed up a good chunk, not enough that he's feeling necessarily safe as Lasbra in that last engagement, but enough that Variety is not posing as big a threat as he would have otherwise. Gets the sustain, stays alive, and then unfortunately Variety lags just enough behind that it's never a 2v2. It's always the 1v2, 1v3 with the rotation that comes over from Vin. Makes it a lot easier. And I mean, talk about a silver platter of gold that's just going to go right in your pockets.
Yeah, Haddox feeling good. Lasbra 1-0-1 as well. And then Jake snags an assist on the back end of that fight. Not surprising, though. I don't think that Captain Twig was getting aggressive there. The desk mentioned early on this is what the Erlang Shen wants to do, as well as the mannequins start there. So you get some of that early burn on those auto attacks, and you saw how close Lasbra was to death there. So maybe more of the same. I think that's important here for Captain Twig. That one doesn't go well, but you still need to exert some pressure early on here, despite the way things went on the right.
And it's one of those things. So Twig is someone I consider, and even though he was getting aggressive there, I think Erlong plays into this pretty well, although now he's getting captured out one more time.
Oh, man, and the damage is big from Lasbra, and Haddix with the up-down once more. And Twig caught into the cage. Genetics now collapsed on Haddix with just a bit of a body block. The stun comes through as well as Awesome Jake follows up with the leap of his own. Now Variety has got to play this one carefully. Last time Variety went in late on his own and got caught out. And what is that damage from Haddix? That is half HP now onto Variety. And so the Sun Wukong is going to have to back up and sustain up a little bit. Yeah, you're putting all your points into your crows early on here, and so Haddix able to chunk down some of these targets in the first 5 minutes.
Well, and here's what's super fun about the Odin, right? And this is something you got to look at. I mentioned it on the desk earlier when he was locked in. Last year, beginning of the year, he is the guy. Everyone's talking about it. Oh my God, Odin's busted. He's too strong. He's doing too much. And they were right? Like it wasn't.
Oh, he was strong.
They
he
were
was doing
absolutely correct. But because of all of that, he got hit with tons of nerfs in a row and fell out of the meta pretty hard. Wasn't really seen. I think occasionally he got picked up, but for the most part, long forgotten. And then slowly it was like, well, okay, Odin, maybe those nerfs were a little too heavy-handed. We pulled him completely out of the meta, but he didn't do a lot. So even though this patch, it's only like a couple seconds of cooldown and a little bit of physical scaling, you have to look at over, the last like 6, 7, 8 patches, wherever Odin's mentioned, because they're all just small little nerfs. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe you need this to sustain yourself again. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing is the culmination of what is a lot of little buffs to slowly bring him back into it.
Yep.
Unfortunately, maybe leaving him in a good spot for Haddix. I'm sure he's happy with it.
Haddix plenty happy. He'll pick up Mystical Mail now, level 8, 201, 6 minutes and 20 seconds into the game. Then you have to consider what counterplay to that might look like. Phantom became a pretty popular active around the time of Odin being very popular. Now I've seen Odin a couple of times. Phantom then has to come back into the conversation. I suppose Big Man Tings can flicker away, but Variety maybe can use the ultimate to get out of there. I'm not actually totally unsure on how the counterplay between Sun Wukong's ult works with the Odin cage there, but Captain Twig, Genetics, Netrioid, they might have a hard time escaping from big jump-in engage from Haddix throughout this game. Might have to get a Phantom on your team.
It's something that I want to see the Kings do, but also, and Taco had mentioned this earlier on the desk, and I wholeheartedly agree, like, upgraded Phantom's a sick item. Like, you get a lot of damage mitigation off of that, and so you're already, like, you're saving your carries. Again, like you said, Big Man Tings might be able to escape, but he could benefit from all of that mitigation as well. So I think it ends up being kind of a double-edged sword, but in a good way. Like a double-edged sword, I guess normally you stab yourself while you're stabbing them. There's got to be some equivalent where it's just nothing but wins. A win and a win for being able to get out of the Odin cage and get all that mitigation. Could help turn a fight. We'll see. I mean, that's a level 12, 6 levels away for Genetics before that even comes onto the table.
It'll be a conversation.
Especially, like you said, Variety. Like, he has survivability. He can escape from that ult. But maybe he wants to pick it up to be helpful for the team as well. It just depends on where they're going to be.
I'm curious how the green buff is going to start to play a role here in some of these games. Genetics is going to go over here, try to do some damage to it on its own. Looks like at a point now on the Samir where soloing it is certainly no big deal. You assume, Gore, that's one of those types of things where, purple and red buffs still are king on the left-hand side of the map because that's where your mid lane, that's the buff your mid laner wants, it's the buff your hunter wants. Actually, we are going to see the counterplay here. Variety uses Somersault Cloud, and you can leap on away. You take the damage, though, on your way out of it. So that's something to look for Variety here as well. But looking at the green buff, maybe it's the type of thing you're the support. You can walk on by it, little extra gold, little extra XP, but making sure you confirm purple and red for your mid and hunter respectively are going to be the most important factors.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's another buff for your jungler to get, or more experience for your support right now, which is going to be helpful for him. But it's also a base boost to your health, a base boost to your mana. I think the most important part is the fact that when you are hanging around with someone, their buff will not expire.
Awesome. Jake throws out the hammer, but it doesn't connect, and luckily the leap away is enough here. The Big Man Ting sends some damage, flying the support's way on his way out. The Camelot Kings fallen by the wayside a little bit in the early game here, but the good news is they slowed down the pace that the Bolts had set on the right-hand side of the map. Haddix has been slowed down. Lasbra has been slowed down as well, and that's the big thing, I think, keeping the Camazots from getting completely unleashed. Then you have to look on the other side. Captain Twig wanted some of that early pressure, tried a couple of times on right, realized that wasn't going to happen. Now maybe, Gore, you shift your eyes on over here towards the left. One charge of the Sunder gets sent Captain Twig's way there. But that's all that'll happen unless the Kings choose to stick around for this purple.
And I like Jake being aggressive
no.
here. That was a big ult to whiff there. I mean, you're still going to get some healing, so Twig back to full health, but to not connect on the taunt, that is a huge sign, at least in my eyes, to pull back. I'm not winning this fight. There's no point in taking it.
Right.
Let's just reset.
And that's probably if I taunt someone in, then Genetics can follow up with a wall and a stun. Great. If not, we choose to back away. And that's exactly what happened. So the Olympus Bolts grab themselves the purple buff. No problem here. It's been quiet, though, out of the mid lane outside of some damage that Big Man Tings has done. And Venenu's looked for some rotations here as well. I think the desk had a pretty good conversation around what those transform targets might start to look like for Ven here this game. Kind of hard to predict. You know, it's sort of a ever-shifting answer depending on what type of situation Ven finds himself in. But there are a lot of great options here, aren't there? I mean, if you want double Odin walls, you want double Bat Out of Hells, double blinds even if you want to swap on over to Barracuda, whatever it is, and there's plenty on the Camelot Kings to transform into as well. This is like kind of a wealth, I don't know, something of riches. I don't remember what the
It's a surplus.
A surplus of
choices
options here for Venenu out of the mid.
I'm actually excited because, like you said, you could transform into Ymir, you could transform into Erlong, you get a taunt or a freeze or a wall. Like, there's a lot. Granted, right now, the pace of this game, I'm feeling Odin, and depending on whether or not they get a Phantom, I'm doubling down on Odin because that makes it even easier to make sure they're locked up. But I'm curious to watch how this evolves because, like you said, it's going to be someone that you can transform into, well, not just damn near anybody. You will be able to pick up someone who is the most prominent in the game. And so far, the carries have been pretty quiet. The jungle, save for Twig's 2 deaths, have been kind of quiet. And so maybe it will be, you know, someone like Barra later on. I actually expect to see Barra tick up his assists more than his kills. He's going to be hanging out over there in left lane. They're not going to be fighting a lot. But the best thing about Xbalanque is anytime your team is fighting, you throw up the blind, you're going to get the assist. Whether they need the blind to get the kill, you're going to be able to pick that up. And so it's a little bit more to line his pockets, and that should help Barra get back to on par with Netroid, who's pulled just a little bit ahead.
Well, and on the other side, we've mentioned the lead that Lasber's built up here. A lot of it the early pressure on the right, but since the farming and the blue buff invades, things like that have gone well for Lasber as well. So it's about 1.5 levels. Maybe imagine he'll tick over to level 12 a little bit earlier. Another meta we've started to see form just in the first couple of matches that we've seen so far today, Gore, is the double pickup of the Sunder, and it's been changed, obviously, to have 2 charges. I'll hold that thought. Here's Big Man Tings. Gets walled away by Genetics. His own teammate will secure his escape here. It's a transformation from Awesome Jake. And I wonder if they'll utilize that transformation in order to go right here, go on over towards the Gold Fury. Netroid is close by here as well. It's been very quiet on the left-hand side of the map as Netroid looks to close that gap. Captain Twig left alone inside of the Odin cage, and it's Venenu who's got one of them. He's transformed into the Odin as well as Lasber uses the Bat Out of Hell. In the meantime, the Gold Fury semi-reset here as Variety up into the Somersault Cloud. Genetics will use his ultimate as well. Awesome Jake being plugged down just by a little bit of damage on the back end. The Gold Fury has been left here, Gormizer, but Netroid finds a big snipe to get the Camelot Kings on the board. Haddock's trying to sidestep his way away, but it won't matter. Both the carries now on the board for the Camelot Kings. There's a stun on a Jake as well, and the leap away from the Fafnir won't be enough.
I mean, they're just trying to get something done, but there's nothing to be done about that one. Barra got a lot of damage out there. Look, Netroid, surprisingly close to death, but at the end of the day, not dead, and that's what really would matter most in that scenario, right? You get the Gold Fury now. You get a good fight if you're the Kings from what has been just not great so far overall. I mean, your terms of engagement, every single time it's been Twig who's caught out. And I will say, in the way games kind of went last year, but mainly this year for Twig, this has been part of his role in the jungle. It's not necessarily this hyper carry. He's going to go 8-2. He's going to be 2-7, but with 14 assists at the very end of it, right? Like, he is appropriately 0-3-0 right now. He's eating the brunt of it, but it just gifted his team such a massive swing.
It did. Venenu did transform into the Odin in that last fight there as well. Opened up for that kill on a Captain Twig, but that's a massive swing now for the Camelot Kings. They were about 1,000 gold behind, now find themselves about 1,500 gold ahead of the Olympus Bolts. Big Man Tings has a great fight there as well, 2-0-1 on this Merlin, and I think Netroid played a fantastic role in that engagement as well. Really from the mid to the left-hand side of the map, it was a great fight. And then Sun Wukong getting on the board to top it all off. So the Camelot Kings have now regained their footing here in this matchup, Gormizer. And I'm intrigued to follow along with this build for BMT as well. You go with a little bit of cooldown early on, Charon's Coin, Deso for some conditional cooldown, Divine Ruin. Because, you know, with the boots getting taken out, there's plenty of conversation to be had about movement speed, things like that. But there's certain characters that need the cooldown on the cooldown boots. Those sorts of things that I think is going to be pretty fun to follow along with, see how these players adapt.
On Twig, at this point, it's one of those things where you continually kill the same person. Depending on their impact of the game, it might be worthwhile. But I feel like some of the target switching right now, Variety is a good target.
Could be a kill.
I'm thinking if
big
you could
rotation.
lock down Genetics, that'd be great.
Big rotation in onto Variety, who uses the Somersault Cloud. Haddix may be trying to cover this escape route. Variety drops down, blinks away underneath the Tier 1 tower. He goes, but Haddix not happy with it. He wants more of a dive. The transformation into the bull for Variety will get him out and safe. And there's no blue buff to invade on here, so the Olympus Bolts spend a little bit of time heading on over to the right, and the answer from the King sends some players on over to left.
And the good news is that there's not a necessarily large objective in terms of like a Gold Fury to take over here. Oh wait, but there's also a Tier 1 tower and the Draugr to be able to take down, of which they've already picked up 2. And those do stack. They last for a little while as well,
Yep.
but maybe not as prominent at this point in the game. I can't remember the last time I saw them pick it up. Netroid either way is going to be able to come over here and scoop that. But that's been an easy amount of control for the Kings over in the duo lane. Like, Barra has admittedly just kind of been hanging alone. And that's a good chunk of swing. I mean, that's a 2-level difference between the carries right now. You've got 1 level in mid, and yes, you technically have the advantage over in your solo jungle area, but that wasn't enough during the last Gold Fury fight, so you're going to have to figure something else out.
I am curious, and this is kind of in-depth and theory craftery. Over on the left-hand side, mention the Draugr and taking that down. It's extra, camp to grab there in that lane. Do you anticipate any lane playstyle differences because of the new look of that lane? You got a little area to hide back there, a couple new walls to kind of dance around behind. Does that really change all that much in your mind? I mean, I suppose you could sneaky send a support over there, something like that. It's going to be very difficult for a jungler to find their way over there unforeseen. Or is it more just the camp that's the big change?
Man, I kind of want it to be this like tactical thing. Like, that'd be really neat if there was like specific gods or something that utilize it a little bit better. I mean, you look at people like Yamoja, all of a sudden you're locking people back in there. But the problem is you have to get the fight in the camp at that point, or to lock him over there.
Oh, it's the use of the darkness from Barracuda here. Captain Twig will escape, but it's a hammer from Jake that connects his big taunt on the back end, and that might slow down the Bolts on their escape away here. One of the Odin cages has worn out here. Venenu is the one who dropped that one down, so Haddix uses the second over in the mid lane, and look at big man Tings. He'll have to use the actives underneath his own tower, but it won't matter because BMT goes down.
So this is a great showcase of something that I think needs to be highlighted, which is we just saw 2 Odin cages. There is a Phantom online, but it showcases that you still have to be in the neighborhood. Unfortunately for Genetics, he wasn't around either target that time around, and so he wasn't able to help anybody get out of there. But that is something that changes as the game goes on. Right now, you're able to find those picks individually if you're the Bolts, but 10 minutes from now, I mean, around a Fire Giant? Yeah, forget it. Nobody's going to be alone like that. I mean, maybe if they are, it's Genetics or Variety, or maybe Twig. But you're not really going to be finding, I think, the same amount of presence and the same pick that you're going to be able to orient around there. So I think that they're going to have to deal with this as it comes up in the next few minutes.
Pressure from the Olympus Bolts onto the Pyromancer here as Genetics looked at by the Olympus Bolts. It's a leap right on through from Haddix. That leap on in. The Crow's doing a little bit less damage, but Genetics wish it did a little bit less than that. Barracuda grabs the kill onto the Amir. Now Netrioid locked into the cage, and the Snipes won't find a kill here, so Netrioid's going to go down eventually. Variety leaps back in off of the Somersault Cloud one by one. The Camelot Kings funneling themselves back into this engagement here, and a little bit of damage. Maybe the tick from Lasbro will get it done, and it sure will. The Olympus Bolts find another 3.
I mean, they have Pyromancer available to them, but yeah, you have Coerce available. I mean, it's not going to be the team-wide Coerce, Jake, just de-transformed. But you're going to be able to get aggressive. Tings, though, is hanging around the back wall.
Gonna get spotted out here at some point, spreads out some of that AoE damage, but now he's gonna have to retreat. Big man Tings working his way away from the FG. The Olympus Bolts get this one low, and it will get taken away. Very close was Variety on the steal, and he'll pay for it with his life. The ultimate price as Barracuda gets another big kill here in this game. Starts to add on to some of that attack speed build that we know Barracuda's been a bit of a fan of here. Ichabod Oboe into the insides as well. 5 members of the Olympus Bolts with the FG.
Yeah, notably very similar, I think, to something we saw Panda Cat doing, but the Transcendence, Aussie, Executioner now looking to start up some crit for Netroid. Very different styles of play from the carries, but ultimately you can see where it's starting to pay off. Netroid in the early game had that big bump and was able to control a lot more of the lane itself, but Bear's caught up in levels. He was 2 down just a couple of minutes ago, so he's been able to close that gap, and now, admittedly, he has Fire Giant, so I would even push him slightly ahead of Detroit.
Yeah, the Camelot Kings, they need to be careful here because the Coerce from Awesome Jake really sets up the bolts for some of these quick objective burns, but they also have an upgraded Frenzy now, so those two stacked on top of one another is going to make quick work. Not even so much of objectives, which of course they will, but of these team fights. You get those out at the same time, and the Camelot Kings are just going to get absolutely burned through, especially if we continue to see the bolts looking for what they have been. You lock an opponent in the cage, and then you just take a 4v5 on the back end.
And I mean, look, 4-1-6, kind of hard to argue with the results that Haddix is getting on the Odin. 3-0-6 there for last
Was it
as well.
okay on Odin in our
I mean,
last
they've been
set?
able to do it. Yeah, Fine OK was able to play it and
pretty good KDA.
Set up a ton of kills for it. And again, this is Odin's second game this year. I mean, he was never looked at in Phase 1. It's only been this weekend.
I was interested to see here how long Captain Twig was going to stay on the right-hand side of the map, but the back will get channeled, and the back will come through as well. The Olympus Bolts looking at a Phoenix Siege here 20 minutes into the game. You've got 2 minutes and 15 seconds left with this FG buff. And this is usually the one, Gore, especially with the towers being the way they were. You've got 4 left on the map to take down. The Kings might have one more FG before they really need to worry about some of these Phoenixes. There's plenty of these towers still to work through if you're the Bolts.
Yeah, a lot of gold on the map, too. I mean, yesterday Mifflin kept calling them gold caches, and that's a great way to look at them, right? Where that's just pocket. Like, this 1,500 gold that's just going to go straight in your pocket. 2,000 if you factor in that Tier 1.
Oh, Ven goes around the backside. He's transformed into the Odin as well, and it's Variety that's locked into place. But you got to be careful. This is where Big Man Tings can do some big damage. Phantom gets used, and Haddix has to leave as Genetics looks to chase down the front line, and Variety is the one who picks up the kill. Big bat out of hell, big cleave damage from the Olympus Bolts as the Camelot Kings found themselves grouped up 1-for-1 trade, Tier 1 and Tier 2 tower down, but the Camelot Kings might look to chase.
It's a frontline for frontline change, but it's a much better position. I mean, low health bars for everybody. Twig just eviscerated, and now it's time for the Bolts to get aggressive again.
Oh, and Twig felt like he was maybe on an island all on his own there. The Camelot Kings had no reinforcements in behind Captain Twig. And I think you're right here, Gormizer. 35 seconds left on Twig, 15 seconds left on Genetics. There's still enough front line left for the Olympus Bolts and enough damage to take down the left side Phoenix, and take it down they will.
And that's just going to be smooth. What, 50 seconds left? The health bars are pretty nice on the Bolts now. But I admire this call. Don't stick around. Don't try to go for this mid lane Phoenix as well. I don't think you have the time to work with the respawns coming up. Now it's just Twig who's waiting 10 seconds. But strip what you can. Admittedly, notably, ignoring the support buff. Come on, guys. Jake needs one too.
That's what
Either
I'm
way,
saying.
completely skipping over that one. But as you had highlighted earlier, they grabbed the Premier buffs, the purple, the red, and of course they got that Fury earlier.
Buffs,
So they just kind of top every single thing that they needed there. And unfortunately, I mean, that was a great Phoenix defense turned into a catastrophic fight for the Kings.
It was. They found a great pick. And I think that's something that we got a brief moment there to highlight, where Big Man Tings wasn't the one who got trapped into one of those cages. And the Olympus Bolts, they kind of funnel in on one guy that got caged there, and that's where this Merlin can send out that big AoE damage if the Olympus Bolts group themselves up too heavily around those Odin cages. Can work both ways depending on how the Bolts position themselves and how Big Man Tings is able to position himself there as well. Couple Shoguns coming out here. Gormizer Genetics has got one. Awesome Jake has got one there as well. Maybe there's a little extra value on the item, and the Hunter's probably thankful for it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, at this point, it's something that I at least personally wasn't thinking about coming into this patch. But again, every item seems to have gotten changed. Plus, a lot of the ones that we would have seen, I think that a lot of people were looking at specifically. Look, I'm going to throw him under the bus a little bit sideways. Raffer last week when he was trying to do no boots before the no boots patch, when he was picking up like your Witch Blade, your Wing Blade, what have you. But a lot of the things that had, let's say, CCR on them they lost that, or they either removed or nerfed in this patch. And so supports have had to kind of shuffle around. Notably, Jake did go still for the Thebes, whereas Genetics is completely just forlorn that one, went for the Relic Dagger instead. But now you can see a little bit of aggression. Well, probably a Pridwin actually coming out of this one for Genetics as well to try and match up to Jake. And that's where that gold difference is coming through. Right now, Jake just feels harder to kill.
He's 4 levels ahead of Genetics. So on levels alone, I think Awesome Jake would agree with you there, Gormizer. 2-1-6 on the Fafnir. Genetics 0-2-4, so the KDA not horrible, but the Kings, since resurging back into this game, just have not been able to do nearly as much killing as the Olympus Bolts have. Now it's the Pyromancer that goes down. Important to look at the actives in this moment as well. The Olympus Bolts underneath that mid lane Phoenix had to burn a lot just a little bit ago. But they've got everything. They've got everything back up and ready. They've got Beads on the carries. They've got Aegis on the carries. But you can say the same for the Camelot Kings.
Yeah.
And you got to keep your eyes on those Phantoms because we haven't seen the premier usage of it yet. And that's maybe when you're grouped up around these big objectives. That's when Genetics will find this big value. But if the Olympus Bolts can stagger out the use of those Odin cages, let's wait for the Phantom to wear out and then jump in with the second one, could still make the Camelot Kings pay.
And I'm wondering, actually, with this next item, it's going to be a big pickup. Haddix goes in, gets the cage, and is looking for the kill.
And look at this. Netrioid left alone. Has to use the
Jeez,
active. He's
Tings.
jumped on. Big Man Tings in the back line. Netrioid got caught in both cages there. Genetics now uses the Phantom to try to get away, but it won't matter. Lasber's got a double. He's on a rampage.
That might be game.
In onto the Titan as Captain Twig is alone here in base. Variety will end up making his way back in as well, but the Olympus Bolts, they smell blood. They smell the Titan. And 25 minutes in, the siege will kick off.
I was going to talk about attack speed and Barracuda. Who cares about that one? The cages prove too much. Odin might need to be banned here, or they're going to have to make a hell of a defense.
Yeah, I don't think the defense is going to be happening, Gormizer. It's a killing spree for Barra, a killing spree for Ben, a deicide for the Bolts, and a big Game 1 win.
If you have to look somewhere to try and figure out what changes need to be made, Lasber's 5-0-10. Unfortunately, Twig is 0-7, right? It's obviously some of the jungle maybe needs to be cleaned up going into game number 2. That Erlong was just caught out from first blood to the last kill we see. Every single chance that we saw Twig try to go and get engaged, he just couldn't get anything done. That Odin cage plus the Morrigan was problematic, so I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of them get banned. And it feels like a lot to tackle on the list of a long checklist there for the Kings.
I mean, look, the Phantom pickup was there. I just don't think the Kings were able to find the value out of that active.
I mean, we saw the last one was after Netroid was dead.
He got caught in both. Netroid got caught in both Odin cages. The poor Chiron had nothing to say about it. The Olympus Bolts, they came to play here in the no boots patch. Game 1 to the Bolts. We'll see what happens in game 2 right after this.
aggro here. Look, every single year, the SPL just keeps getting better. Season 7 was incredible, and in Season 8, I'm sure our players are going to take their game to the next level. But in order to do that, they're going to need the best gear they can get their hands on. And that's why I'm so excited to announce the title sponsor for Season 8 of the SPL is Alienware. Yeah, that Alienware. Our players are getting the best of the best in computer gaming. These Alienware Aurora Ryzen Edition PC setups are insane. Not only will these be the PCs that the players will compete on once we are in studio, but Alienware is also providing one for each player at their home setup to make sure their practice is as good as possible. Now let's get down to brass tacks. The specs on these Alienware Aurora Ryzen Edition desktops are amazing. An AMD Ryzen 9 16-core processor.
That's a lot of cores.
That's plenty of processing power.
Plenty of cores.
If you want to stream, this is the way to go.
I know a lot about my cores, so. I mean, Pilates, right?
64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM.
What? Is that true?
That is true. I mean, this thing has 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM.
Which you can do literally anything with.
Literally anything.
I've never had more than 16 gigs.
That's quadruple the amount I have at home.
And one of the hottest commodities in the PC world, an NVIDIA GeForce 3090 graphics card.
Insane how much better this is than what I have.
The best graphics you really need, Ultra, of course.
Content's gonna look good.
And what's the point of all the power if you can't see it? Players will also be using the Alienware 25-inch 240 Hz monitors. Man, when I load into scrims with this bad boy, I'm gonna feed so hard. And it's gonna be in perfect picture quality. We are so excited to be partnering with Alienware for Season 8 of the SMITE Pro League. And the best part is, this VIP treatment, it's not just for the pros. You too can get the best possible SMITE experience. Just go to smitegame.com/Alienware and use code SMITEAW to get special discounts on some of Alienware's best products. Thanks again to Alienware. Make sure you're following them on Twitter and Instagram. That's at Alienware on both platforms. And you can join their community at alienwarearena.com.
And you're telling me an alien wore this?
Hello, SMITE fans, and welcome back to the SMITE Pro League, powered by Alienware. And if that video didn't sell you guys already, you can definitely make sure to play like the pros and look at everything in the most picture-perfect quality by heading on over to smitegame.com/Alienware and plugging code SMITEAW to not only pick up a potential 240 Hz monitor or one of those new Aurora Ryzen R12 Edition PCs. They also have laptops to boot, and you can also stay up to date on all things Alienware by following them on Instagram and Twitter at Alienware, as well as joining their global community by heading on over to alienwarearena.com. And Mifflin, as much as we love to talk about the title sponsor for the SMITE Pro League, it's not just the gear that was coming through for the Bolts here in this game one. It seemed as though Lasbro putting on a little bit of a show and giving us a treat in set against the Camelot Kings.
Yeah, I mean, we called it out on the desk. So we knew Lazar was going to have at least an easier time working his way into the back line on this Camazot's pick, and, well, he did exactly that. It felt like he was nigh unkillable, consistently using that ultimate for aggressive positioning. But it's not just Lazar. It's not just this phenomenal Camazot's damage output. I think there's a growing trend here in the SPL. If we're going off day one, and it's not often you really should go off of day one. We're still ironing out the kinks here in the meta. Odin, I think, has been doing incredibly well. I would not be surprised if every single casual game you load into tonight, tomorrow, and the next week is going to have at least one Odin in it.
It was only a matter of time before Pro League teams started figuring out some of the best ways to shut down some of these gods like the Amir, like the Chiron. And with these new season changes having taken place, Mifflin, the pathway has certainly been paved for Odin to start making his mark on the new meta. And Haddock certainly looked fantastic with this god pick selection choice. He was just able to force so much, whether it was cooldowns, purification beads, aces, it didn't really matter. Haddock's just had all the cutoff potential in the world, made it incredibly easy for the likes of Lasbro, Venenu, and Awesome Jake to scoop everybody up, looking for the escape out of that initial Odin cage. And Barracuda as well. We have to mention John Salter from time to time. You know, ADCs kind of just, they're ADCs, you know, they tend to fall to the wayside sometimes.
He did top damage, Taco.
No, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, stop trying to downplay my man's accomplishments
Did you
here.
not
He's
see
sick.
Lasbro with all the kills.
Well,
That's
yeah,
what
I mean,
matters.
that is cool, and he's
That's what
jungler.
matters.
Yeah, your team's only ever as good as your jungler. I mean, I agree. You're talking to the right guy about it. I'm trying to give your role a little bit of credit. Won't catch me doing it again. We'll never slip up. Instead, yeah, we'll stick with the junglers. Lasbra looking real good.
Lasbra certainly feeling pretty good with that 1-0 advantage over the Camelot Kings. And I'm not going to say that the Olympus Bolts made it look easy by any means here, Mifflin. I just don't think that the Camelot Kings really had a recovery aspect that they could try to bank on once the control started rising through. That global blind as well definitely posed a lot of issues here for the Kings. Odin might be something they look at taking off the board for game number 2.
I'm going to keep it a 100% buck with you here, Taco. I was too busy focusing in on Barracuda slamming that loaf of bread. I had seen the memes. I saw it on Reddit. I saw it on Twitter. I actually never knew what it was until this exact moment. He's just out there eating bread, maybe. Chat, here's the deep lore. If you guys have ever seen a little anime called Death Note, there's this guy named L. He eats sugar, bread, essentially 80% sugar. Just make sure your brain's firing on all cylinders at all times. Barracuda min-maxing inside and outside the game.
With bread.
With bread. It's sugar, which is the fuel for your brain. Taco, focus up.
Hey, friendly reminder to any bread agencies currently listening into this SPL broadcast. As we know that they are, bread companies have bound to be taking interest.
Name one bread company.
Arnold's.
Is that real?
It's like Power Bread. Yes, it's like some of the healthiest bread on the market.
What is Power Bread?
What do you mean? It's bread with huge multi-grain abilities.
Multi-grain ability. They specced into the multi-grain tree. Let's go ahead and talk about the piece a little bit here, Taco. Camelot Kings taking solo off the table first overall, and the Olympus Bolts targeting out that Raijin, keeping that mid-lane focus.
Sounds like you need more multi-grain in your diet.
I guess so.
Just saying. Just gonna throw it out there. Bolts, on the other hand, they are in that second pick position, getting a little bit more back on track here from Mifflin's apparent hate for bread, by the way.
I'm the one that brought up the bread. Okay.
Yeah, you're the one that clearly hates bread. But Camelot Kings, they're looking to acquire a set win. Odin actually going to be banned as their third pick choice. And Mifflin, that is quite a statement for the Kings to actually believe that the Odin is worth banning in that first top 3.
Hey, Odin's been looking pretty good in both sets so far today, so it makes sense to me that the Kings want to make that adaptation. If they haven't had too many opportunities to scrim against it, if it really is a pick that's just come through with this no-boots meta, haven't had that much time to develop counter strategies, might as well and take it off the table. But what does that leave available? Fenrir, picked up first overall, has great flex potential for the Kings, has potential to go either into support or into the jungle. If you're kind of crazy, maybe the soul lane. Meanwhile, on the other side, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's get that Fafnir and Morgan.
Morgan one more time here for Venenu in the top 2 out of the Bolts. And Mifflin, it is certainly... I can't... Is it really risk first reward for Venenu when he gets Morgan and opts to choose her so early on in a composition? Because if anything, I like the transformation option that's already available for this Morgan. Having a Fenrir opportunity, maybe try and utilize some of that beads burn potential against the Kings.
Before I jump into answering that question, I got to bring it up, Taco. I've been waiting for you to hit me with the signature phrase for a while. I actually had a lot of conversations with Finch about your risk versus reward statements, and he had said to me, is there anything on the planet, a single decision you can make that you aren't weighing risk versus reward? I'm not sure that there is.
All the time.
Like, name one thing.
It's called having confidence, Mifflin.
But you still...
There's no risk involved to taking Morgan super early on if you're confident that you're just going to outright better the competition.
You're right.
You have to worry about the challenge. So there's all the reward and none of the risk to boot. I've had this discussion with him enough times, too.
You checkmated me instantly.
I checkmated you in the same way I checkmated Jan. He just couldn't process it at the time when we had the conversation.
Yeah, it just wasn't quite cerebral enough. But... we get to talk about these 3-man core here from the Kings, Fenrir, Ymir, and Artemis. That is a lot of CC. Single target from the Fenrir inside of the Ragnarok, but can just drag him over, drop him into a trap, all of a sudden you're rooted. You also have the great counter matchup as Artemis into this Fafnir, goes into Dragon Transformation, roots himself in place. Well, drop a trap at his feet. He's going to be there a little bit longer. Can do the same thing on the counter transformation. Turns back into a dwarf. I think he's a dwarf. I'm not quite sure. Either way, I like this matchup so far.
It can definitely work out in Artemis's favor, but one thing that the Kings are going to have to keep in mind is making sure to get Artemis to that relevant stage of damage burn. She has a lot of shred potential. We've been seeing already the toying around from some hunters here today with that bow tree specifically. A little bit more Atalantis, a little bit more Ickful, some Odibo presence. A lot of attack speed clearly is very favorable for Artemis. Might be prime Silver Branch opportunity here.
Could be. She's one of the best gods to utilize that ability. The Vengeful Assault, so good at stacking up that attack speed, as well as has decent matchup into what the Bolts have already drafted here. Bolts very slow heavy in their CC. The Fafnir Hammer AoE applies a slow, well, Vengeful Assault going to get you out of there. The same can be said of the Vampiric Bats from Camelot, so it's going to be a little bit harder to lock down this Artemis, and has pretty good CC immunity inside the kit. You can actually reaction use your ultimate, the Caledonian Boar. Yeah, I read the wiki. On the Morrigan stun.
What's the name of her 3?
Vengeful, no, Suppress the Insolent.
Oh, okay. Almost at you. But yes. Yeah, she's going to be suppressing the Insolent of Hachiman, by the way. But I actually think that this is a really interesting matchup between this duo lane. Hachiman's also another hunter that we haven't really had too many opportunities to see, at least throughout the duration of Split 1. Had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 appearances, if that. Might have been at the SEC level of play. But more importantly, Artemis, I think, does have a little bit of poke favor in comparison to the Hachiman, just because of the fact that he's got the clearly telegraphed dash, so she'll have the range to work with. I'm curious to see if the Kings are going to actually try and just go for a heavy dual lane pressure to maybe alleviate some of the focus that might have gone to that Habwa otherwise.
There is a little bit of parity in the Artemis versus Hachiman matchup. Going out on a limb here, pretty sure Hachiman's second ability is called Heavenly Banner.
Yes.
Kind of operates similarly to Suppress the Insolent in that it's a large circular poke ability. One applies a slow, the other one gives you an attack speed buff. That's Hachiman as the latter. But this Hebo lock-in, I think, is one we're going to have to focus in on here. That is a lot of AoE damage with the Crushing Wave ultimate. It is the god of triple ultimates. I'd argue quadruple ultimates. The Water Carpet is that versatile an ability. But up against this Bolt's draft, he's going to have his work cut out for him insofar as positioning. He has buco damage. He's got the capacity to one-shot the opposition, but if the Morgan catches him unaware, well, he's just as one-shottable himself.
And maybe I'm in the wrong here, but do you feel as though this was intended for Captain Twig? I would have to assume that it is Twig's jungle of choice, just because Fenrir, it seems as though... Actually, no, excuse me. That's going to be Big Man Tings in the mid lane. I thought maybe there'd be some craziness, availability for some new meta fun, but no, Hawa for the mid lane for Big Man Tings. Do you think that that's going to be problematic up against the likes of Camelot and a Morgan who has the availability to transform into a Fenrir, try to utilize that Brutalize against the King's mid laner?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of a rumor, I'd say, a little Smite myth that Fenrir has all that great a matchup in a Hebo. Sure, you can use the Brutalize to chase down the Crushing Wave, but you're getting hit by Crushing Wave. Doesn't feel too good, does it? That's one of the hardest hitting abilities we have here in Smite. I think that Hebo is going to have an easier time than we would have expected from like a Merlin or something along those lines. Can use that Water Carpet to just straight up immune the slow from Vampiric Bats. Can outrun the Bat out of Hell as well. Means that he can likely utilize it to juke out some of this damage, some of this dive potential that the Kings were struggling with last time around. But I think the real narrative of this match right here is the old guard versus the new guard. Every single one of the picks on the Kings draft, I mean, that's 2012 Smite at its core. And you look over here at the Bolts, I mean, I think every single one of those gods came out after 2016. This is prime.
Definitely a fun little matchup of new versus old god focuses here, Mifflin. But more importantly, as Artemis and Hebo, they're obviously much more immobile in terms of carries. So do you like the Fenrir, Amir, and Sobek as the front line for those double carries?
It's good. It's a lot on the Ymir and the Sobek. Sobek generally going to be acting as the peel god for the Camelot Kings, and Fenrir and Ymir likely going to be the initiators for this squad, but I think it's the backline that's really going to struggle here. Artemis and Hebo have the ability to avoid slows, sure, but once they're able to close gap, the Olympus Bolts that is, onto this backline, after Crushing Wave is used, after Caledonian Boar has been expended, these guys are really going to struggle up against the survivable backline dive that the Bolts have. Camazot's, sure, can't apply as slow, but can still just kind of hover in the air with a bat out of hell, wait for the board to disappear, and then re-engage himself. And the chase down potential that the Bolts have outside of their frontline dive is also really good. I mean, talk about Hachiman's ability to hop on Epona and slam people across a football field, or Fafnir's ability to have the largest leap in the game. The Camelot Kings are going to have to focus heavily on peeling their backline.
And how do you think the Kings do they need to be the initiators here, Mifflin, in order to actually find success with this backline? Or do you think that this is primarily going to boil down to having a better counter initiation against the Bolts?
I think that the Bolts will likely be the ones initiating the majority of these fights in the late game. In the early, Camelot Kings have a pretty distinct advantage around this Ymir and this Fenrir, so maybe utilize that for the first 7 to 10 levels. Outside of that, though, once we start to get to these late game fights, it's all about who's really routing the enemy better, who's getting into the back line, who's able to make more use of their high execution mage. Both Morgan and Hibois, incredibly short range, have high burst, but have the capacity to have it done to themselves as well. I'm keeping my eye on the mid laners for this matchup.
Well, Venenu certainly want to try and give mid laners a taste of their own medicine whenever he takes that Morgan for the Changeling transformations. A lot of ideal God pick selection choices, though, that he could definitely opt for to try and funnel into some of this Bolts aggression that we see, because there's definitely a lot more early to mid-game presence for this Bolts roster, Mifflin. But for right now, we're going to find out whether or not the Olympus Bolts are going to be able to bring this one home, or if we get a Game 3 series. Dolson, Gore, your time to shine.
Only one more for the Olympus Bolts and 2 more for the Camelot Kings. And the Camelot Kings, they need those wins to start right now, Gordon.
Yeah.
Big man Tings is going to get the Hebo, and what an interesting pick this one is. This is one we've talked about a little bit, actually, back in the green room and just in our caster sessions where we're talking about things we expect to be coming up. And I think you've been a big fan. Well, you're a big fan of Hebo anyway, whether he's good or not.
Yeah.
But Hebo is definitely a name that has come out as a God pick that we might see a little bit more of.
As someone who has played him through the years when he's good and when he is not, yeah, I will always get through. Fun fact, Hebo's the reason I got into Smite. I saw someone playing a Hebo in a video.
So
and
thank you, Hebo.
Immediately came in. He wasn't available to me because I didn't have the God pack. Spent $30 on the spot because I was like, I want to play that guy.
Best value in gaming.
And then immediately, played nothing but Hebo for like 2 years, then started branching out. Look, I got better after a while, but it was only Hebo. Me and my friend were the guys that, well, we duo-queued Hebo Loki, okay? I gotta admit it. I gotta get it off my chest.
Gore.
If we were those guys.
Gore, take a second, say your goodbyes, take your headset off.
Goodbye.
You're cut early. I don't know. Go hang out.
No. Oh no!
No, but look, Hebo. We joke about when he wasn't good because maybe now we're starting to enter an area where he is good. You know, I think Staff of Mirrodin got some changes.
Yes.
That's something I think people have been looking out for on him as well. This will be a great data point, I think, in what expectations for this pick should be moving forward.
This actually ends up kind of being, like you said, multifaceted, right? Some of the items changes, well, yeah, they can benefit Hebo, but not only that, it's a good god that has paired well with Tings in the past, and he just got recently buffed. And you might think, oh my god, Hebo got buffed? Like, well, that guy level 20 is insane. It was his early game. We got to be fair about that. They just tried to make it a little bit better because that's always been his problem, right? Level 1 through 5, he kind of sits there and exists. Honestly, level 5 through 10, if his ult's not up, he just kind of sits there or gets sat on. And so it's not necessarily very fun, especially in a competitive game like this. It's very easy to get back there. And admittedly, between him and Artemis, that's a lot of mobility lacking on the side of the King. So you need some protection in that. And their protection comes in the form of a lot of damage. Attack speed benefits Artemis. Also recently got a little bit of a buff in that patch. Not just in her trap, but I think her attack speed on her 2 got buffed as well. So she's going to be able to hit a little harder, a little faster. And for Hebo, it's that early game damage to help bring him back forward. And this could potentially be really good for the Kings. It could also end up falling flat on its face because it has nowhere to run.
Yeah, well, you'll be sad if that's the outcome, right? Because you always want to see Hebo do well. The counterpart is Venenu back on this Morgan, and the 1-2 punch of the Odin cages in game number 1 was just too much for the Kings to deal with, even when they had the Phantom there on their side. So still Morgan for Ven. Transformation targets may be a little bit different this game, but Crushing Wave could be a good option here for Ven if you want a Hebo on your side as well. You're gonna trade those out with one another maybe as the game goes on. That's a question that Ven will likely have the answer for moving on here in the next few minutes. Captain Twig will like to get off to a better start here this game, Gore.
A better game.
A better game, sure, a better game that starts with a better start. And that's starting now over in the duo lane here for the Camelot Kings. Look at the freeze and the lockdown as Barracuda takes so much damage. Genetics down to half HP, but you could say the same for Awesome Jake. So the health trading more effective here for the Camelot Kings. But back to Captain Twig. Now you're on this Fenrir. Not that Erlang Shen wasn't an early game god, but Fenrir absolutely is. And so I think a lot of onus on Captain Twig to make something work here for the Kings.
And Fenrir has been one of the most banned gods over the last 4 or 5 weeks, right? I mean, we saw him jump to the top, specifically against the Bolts, against the Dragons. He's become a very prominent pick, but I think Twig has had this in his wheelhouse for most of this first phase in this entire year, now into phase 2. So it's not surprising to see them, well, get aggressive and pick it up.
Barracuda walks forward here, takes the freeze and the wall, but Netdruid not in a position to return much auto attack damage on in as the wave was getting whittled away. Lasbra back on the Camazots here, counter to the Camelot Kings. Giving Captain Twig on over the Fenrir. So it's a couple changes here for the Olympus Bolts. Maybe a similar mindset here for Barracuda. You're not going to have the big X-Ball ultimate, Awesome Jake, Fafnir here. Really, it is a big swap, though, that Odin's not there, because that was so much of the game plan for the Olympus Bolts, where it kind of feels like, Gore, a big swap for the Camelot Kings as far as gods that they're bringing to the table here. I think variety on the Sobek out of solo lane will be pretty interesting to follow along with. You get a little healing in your kit, which will help you stay in lane against Haddix. But once you get to the team fight portion, that's when the Sobek can really disrupt.
I mean, it makes things, a little more problematic. Variety, like, not only are the Kings throwing it back because all of their gods are as OG as it gets, but also the fact that Sobek solo hasn't been seen for a little while. I mean, it was very prominent, and it still had, I think, a couple of plays last year, but it has not been anywhere near as prominent as it was a few years ago. So interesting to see him go back to this, and much to the point where I don't know that we're going to see anything happening over here. Osiris might be able to fight. Sobek can kind of fight with Twig in the neighborhood. Maybe they want to get aggressive, but that's the way it's going to have to go. It's going to have to be Twig over here to help Variety.
Yep.
Variety won't be able to get it done on his own. And look, that's a Guardian on the other side with a really good dash for an escape. Haddix, with all the slows in the world, Lasbra with the chase down, are going to have to overcommit, I think, to get Variety. So maybe the solo lane's completely forgotten for the first 15 minutes of this game.
Yeah, that's level 7s on an Osiris as well as a Sobek. I'll rotate over, help you with your blue buff, but
but miss me on everything else.
Miss me on literally anything else that's happening over there in that lane. Dual lane has seen some pressure. Then maybe that starts to leave the mid lane here. Haddix will get plucked on through, but Lasbra's leaving. Does not think there's enough damage or threat to need to turn around and help out his solo laner. So maybe that leaves the duo lane and the mid lane here a little bit. Big Man Tings has already surpassed level 5 by a pretty decent margin. Level 8 now. Picked up Charon's coin on the back end of that Vampiric Shroud. So there's a small window really early on in the game where you can punish this Hebo because you don't have that crushing wave yet. Now it's going to be a little bit more difficult to make him pay as the sprint gets popped here for Gen X just to survive.
And I actually like this because it lets Netroid get aggressive, but I think appropriately so, falling back. And now there's a fight on the Tings.
There you go. It's the crushing wave used defensively from Big Man Tings, and I think that's fine here for Lasbra. You jump on in, you force the crushing wave away. Now damage, defense offline, Genetics rooted in place, and Lasbra detonates Genetics on the left-hand side of the map over by the purple buff, and the Olympus Bolts off to a 1-0 start.
Okay, something about seeing two Camazots limp away from a killed Ymir is very funny to me, but not very funny for Genetics there. I mean, that is the worst-case scenario, I think, for you to have happen, right? You get a good glimpse of where Venenu's starting to look at those transformations. Right now it's on the Lasbra early on. Maybe that Hebo if it gets to a good start later on, but as of right now, that control and maybe even just survivability that they're going to be able to bring is huge for what the Bolts have already locked in. That's a good first blood. They've already amassed so close to a 2,000 gold lead. Not quite, but they're getting there at this point. And if they can just start looking for either invades or soon enough this Fury, they're really going to be able to seal the deal.
Been a tough set so far for Genetics. Didn't maybe get the value that he was hoping for in game number 1 on this Ymir. Now back at it here in game 2. Lord of the Afterlife used from Haddix, lurking in the waters. It should be enough damage from Variety and Captain Twig underneath the tier 1 tower, unless the tower shots turn one around, and they will not. Now Variety does combine with Twig. We weren't sure if we would see that, but it does end up happening.
And they absolutely needed Twig there, but Vin looking to get some jukes on. Jake trying to just set him up. They actually might try to turn this around.
Could, as Genetics gets stunned away. Now Captain Twig transforms. It's Venenu brought right into the waiting arms of Big Man Tings, but Captain Twig's got the damage. Captain Twig has got the kills, and now the Camelot Kings in one fell swoop turn themselves back around here in this game, up 2-1 in the kills department, still about 1,000 gold behind.
About exactly what you would
But
need, though, for
ahead?
Twig to be able to get in this game. I mean, we've been talking about the Fenrir, highlighting him. He's been banned a lot of these last few weeks, and people are first picking him. And you got to say, okay, well, cool. What's he bringing though? Twig showcases it, right? The ability to control. They burned Venenu's beads prior to the ult, so it was even easier for Twig to get in there and close that gap. And that's just the setup that they're going to be able to bring. They have a lot of damage on the back of the CC that the Kings bring, and it only gets better with time. I mean, right now we're not even looking at this. Netroid, like this Artemis, isn't even in the conversation for the team fights yet. Just Twig is enough damage to make those things very frightening.
Well, if damage is a concern here for the Olympus Bolts, maybe it shouldn't be. Haddix picks up a stone-cutting sword early on here on this Osiris, and then whittling away some of that Breastplate of Valor might help in keeping Variety at bay just a little bit longer. So we'll follow along with that build from Haddix and see what direction it chooses to go here into the future. Hey, top left of the screen, we got a Draugr counter.
Yeah.
Love that with the new updates. We got Totem of Ku on one side, Draugr over on the other side. Wait, did we literally have a conversation about this? I think Mifflin and Hindu talked about how if a Totem of Ku was in the duo lane, Hunters would never bother going to get it or something because all they know how to do is farm, kill, and what was the third thing there? Maybe that's just it.
They farm, kill, and run away? That sounds like that's.
I expanded on their bit by forgetting the third thing that Hunters do, but there is literally something that now can maybe keep track of dual lane pressure over there. The Totem of Ku has largely been controlled by Haddix this time, and it's a fun little glimpse.
Noticeably, though, that was something I can't remember the Totem of Ku numbers from last game because I'll be completely honest with you, I just didn't look at them. But I can remember the Draugr numbers going overwhelmingly in favor of Netro and Genetics. Meant very little by the end of the game.
Right.
The Bolts were able to find their opening elsewhere. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar story just because they have that pressure.
Right, lane pressure,
It's
sure.
going to be something that's interesting to see how Barrett translates because Hachiman and Xbalanque are very different in the middle of a team fight, but Hachiman is going to be very safe and has a lot of chase down potential as well in the same mobility that keeps him safe.
See what happens here. I was wondering if Lasbro would choose to dive the Tier 1 towers. Has the bubble there so he could eat the charge of Tusky if Netroid was looking for it there, but I think smart for Lasbro to back on off from that one. Could be a rotation out now from Barracuda as a little pressure has been found on a Netroid beneath his Tier 1 tower, but instead it looks like Gore, both teams are turned back to farming here. Big Man Ting's got a stack on that Charon's coin, a little life steal on the back end of it as well. This is maybe a pace that he wants, where on this Hebo you're starting to get into that power spike region where you can really deal some serious damage to these squishies.
Yeah, not a lot of pressure getting turned onto him. Just finished a Bancross talent, so he's going to be able to start hitting hard. Plus, I'll admit it, like as much as it maybe sucks to not get some of I mean, boots were just phenomenal for the amount of gold they cost. But at the same time, you just get to stack on your power items now if you're Hebo, and I bet that's feeling good with a Charon's coin into a Bancross talent. That has a lot of survivability and a lot of turnaround potential.
Captain Twig now collapsed on by Awesome Jake and Lasbro. In the meantime, Barracuda's in a 2v1 of his own over on the left-hand side of the map. He's taken good damage here. Genetics and Netroid both hold on to their ultimates here, so Barracuda, as a result, able to keep his beads in his back pocket. And look at the transformation in the beads from Lasbro and the transformation from Awesome Jake, and Tusky has found no value. Now Genetics into the Shards of Ice will get some damage on Lasbro. That's about it, though, and that's a big turnaround there. Lasbro, I don't know why I said beads, didn't use them, but said turns around, gets the damage out, and Awesome Jake is able to do the same.
Now let's roll it back to the conversation we were having earlier. That lack of mobility. There's a case in point. I mean, Artemis can move
bubble
faster and she can stun, and that's it. She has no other survival. Like, her survival mechanic is to kill you better than you can kill her. I think it was interesting. I can't think of another way to shoehorn this in, so I'm going to mention it now.
Oh, please do.
In that the Artemis ban we saw in Game 1, specifically here by the Kings, was an interesting one because, as someone was so nice to point out from production, Kyle threw it to me, the last time she was banned was in Season 6 for Dignitas versus SK. And so it's not something that shows up often, and honestly, I'm wondering how many times it happened in Season 6, period.
That's
let
against
alone
Zapman,
what's going
right?
to be able to come through. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing, and Zapman's the one who played her, I believe, last year, and so far this year, he's the only one who's touched her.
Yeah, I'll say Zardamus now, so one of the old heads doesn't have to remind me that that's really what it is. Fight happening in the mid lane, though, as Awesome Jake gets stunned down, but he'll leap away. Captain Twig, Ragnarok, right back in the way of damage, and Big Man Tings not able to use his ultimate here in this mid lane engagement. Captain Twig uses the beads, uses the Ragnarok, and he'll have to get out.
And Showcase is another great transformation option for Venenu, right? Hey, I can just be the Fenrir. Like, you could ban Fenrir from us, you could take him from us and have that be a form of ban. Unless I'm just the Morgan and I become the Fenrir anyway. Maybe not as good as putting it on the Lasbert, but still something that's going to be beneficial.
Can Genetics steal away this Fury? Tusky goes flying, and it's Awesome Jake who eats the last stun. Crushing Wave hits nothing on the front side of this fight, and the Olympus Bolts will get the opening kill onto the Genetics. Barracuda with the Aegis stays in the fight a little longer. What's that lifesteal from Barracuda? Big man Ting's able to turn it around, but Barra's bought enough time for the rest of the team to surge on forward, and it's a double kill from Venenu. And that is close margins. Man. Barracuda nearly turns that around.
Look, I've seen Aussie passive do some insane things. And namely, it's, hey, I'm in the jungle, I get really low, I back off, I clear a camp, I'm full health again, right? That's the insane Aussie passive that you normally see. That was the best timing. I mean, it survives way longer than I think he should have. And while it didn't end up resulting in the Fury for them, it just showcased the Bolts aren't anything that you can just glance over right now. Even with all the damage on the Kings, they are really dictating the pace of this.
They absolutely are. Aussie, highlighted there by Doug, getting big value for Barracuda. Still dies, but I think that kind of second wind of a fight that the Olympus Bolts were able to work forward, grab themselves an extra kill was great. Though the Camelot Kings probably happy here, Gore, that they're able to keep the Gold Fury on the map. The Olympus Bolts, remember, we're ahead by maybe about double of what they are now, and the gold lead is largely stagnated.
I mean, even more so, you can see where that large dip was right around the 7-minute mark where just the Kings come in, get a really, really big win. And they've been farming a little bit better on the Kings as well. Like, it's keeping the gold even though that the Bolts are winning these fights. And so it keeps the interesting conversation above, which is whoever gets this Gold Fury is going to really find themselves in a distinctive lead, but even more so if they're able to translate it into some pressure around a Fire Giant. Last game, it kind of felt like out of nowhere where the Bolts just start up a fight, win it, and then get a Fire Giant afterward. They completely ignore the Pyromancer. Normally we get to see a couple of Pyros prior. And so maybe the Kings are looking to, well, first off, mitigate that. They do not want that to happen again, but also try to figure out the same amount of pressure, especially with Ymir. I mean, this is one of Genetics' best gods. I think he has plenty of capabilities to get this one rolling with the setup that he has.
Certainly could. Green buff has dropped down. I think we're starting to see how some of the priority looks on the buff. Certainly nice for the supports to have, but Genetics is not going to circle back and attempt to go pick that one up here. Captain Twig looking for the engage on to Venenu, who will transform into the Fafnir, or the Fenrir, excuse me, all on his own. Now Haddox chops away in the mid lane onto Captain Twig, who goes down. So it's another kill on over the Olympus Bolts. And Gore, it's back-to-back games where Twig has now, he's looked better, I think, here in game number 2. But hasn't been quite as clean, maybe, as the Camelot Kings jungler would have hoped.
At that very beginning early play that we saw from this Fenrir fit exactly the way they needed it to. Since then, it's slowed down a lot. In fact, I'd actually say that we've seen Venenu get more utility out of the Fenrir than Twig right now.
Yeah, maybe.
Which unfortunately is going to slow down the entire pace of the Kings. I mean, that setup from Twig is borderline necessary for Kings to get his damage off, at least at this point. They're going to need something else from the team to make it work.
Haddox has to use his beads here, and then it's a Lord of the Afterlife in onto Big Man Tings. Will the stun be there? Maybe from Netrioid as Tusky roars on through the back line here. Barracuda weaves in some auto attacks here, and look at the disengage attempt from the Kings, but this could be big damage. If Big Man Tings had his ultimate here, there were grouped up bolts all throughout the jungle here, but Big Man Tings is able to cleave out some of the damage nonetheless. The Olympus Bolts half HP. Camelot Kings low as well.
I mean, that's like the dream corridor, the dream grouping if you're a Hebo, and then, of course, the unfortunate nightmare timing where your ult's not available, you don't have anything to follow up. Once again, showcasing Netrioid has to burn both relics, or at this point, I guess, uses Aegis there just because he needs to get away, had to use his ult just to peel away. I mean, the upsides of Artemis and the upsides of Hebo are very similar, which are Habois, depending on how you want to trace it back and where the pronunciation is. And now that this Wind Demon's online, I think Netrioid is going a little more into it, but it's the high late game damage. It's their team fight potential in the 22-minute range. Not so much in there getting away from, especially Venenu, who can transform into a Fenrir at any given time that he chooses. Now that ult's available, Lasbert, who's going to be able to dive, Haddox, who can dive, Jake, who seems to have no qualms about jumping into the backline. I think that this is almost a nightmare composition to face up against. There's definitely some worse things that the Bolts could have to really ruin Netrioid and Tings' lives, but It is not going to be an easy game for them, even once they get their damage on.
Absolutely not, and especially not when Lasbra has been playing with the freedom that this Camelot has. I think this Magai's Cloak has gotten great value from Lasbra.
Oh, yeah.
It's what I incorrectly called beads earlier on, because the glowing golden character just kind of makes my mind go there. It was the Cloak that ate the CC earlier on from Tusky on that Tier 1 tower dive. And now Lasbra does have beads. You're going to get this Magai's Cloak. You're going to be able to eat something on your initial engage and then also have the beads. So slowing down a Camelot that then has Bat Out of Hell to continue to chase you down feels maybe next to impossible here for the Camelot Kings. But the Camelot Kings still find themselves absolutely relevant, if not even, in the gold department.
Yeah.
It's just the Olympus Bolts who have been doing more killing. So I don't think any surprise here that the Camelot Kings go fishing a little bit, see if they can find a pick.
And look, we've seen countless times where a team has been up in kills right here, and they just aren't able to control a Gold Fury, right? I mean, you lose one fight if you're the Bolts. Now you're behind in gold, probably behind in kills.
Could be a little awkward here for the Olympus Bolts. They're pushing down the Tier 1 tower in mid. That's what Venenu's able to grab here, but he'll rotate on out on this Morgan. The rest of the Olympus Bolts evenly spread over the course of the rest of the map, but I think this is a great call here. Lasbra and Ven, they sense that the Kings putting some pressure on the left-hand side, rotate over, grab the Pyromancer here on right, so a little extra gold infuses itself onto the Olympus Bolts here. Kind of a weird limbo we're in at this point in the game, Gore, where the Kings, you can tell, want to look for something, and now is maybe the time, as Variety lurking in the waters here. But that's a big ultimate now down.
It's going to give them some technical mana regen, but admittedly, you're just looking at the CC immunity, and Lasbra jumps into the backline.
Lasbra jumps out of the backline after his bubble is popped. It's a transformation from Awesome Jake. Takes a little bit of time away from the initial siege on in, and Jake has to leap away here. Look at Haddox and Ven. They're chopping away into the front line. It's a big knockup from Big Man Tings, who's locked down Venenu, and then the Ragnarok into the crushing wave is the 1-2 punch that the Camelot Kings needed to help turn this fight around. Now Barracuda full-on retreat.
Solo.
And it looks like the horse will get him out alive for the time being, but Big Man Tings, he's got some speed.
It's just barely enough for Bear. That stun from Jake maybe helping out more than anything Bear could have done there. That's a lot of pressure. That should be the Gold Fury.
Whoa.
And again, it goes back to show that all it takes is one little fight, and all of a sudden the Gold Fury is going to be able to go the other way. The Kings now being able to take at least a little bit of control, although I'm going to watch carefully as the gold goes up, because it's not really the position you would want to be in. I think the way the Bolts played the last few minutes kept it so that the Kings really couldn't pull as far ahead as I think they would have liked on the other end of it. It's mainly that Pyromancer helping mitigate a lot of that.
Well, the game has been balanced on a nice knife's edge in the gold department, but really it feels like from so early on, as the graphs that Doug just showed us, that the Camelot Kings in the experience department have pretty consistently been ahead here in this game. Variety's been about 2 levels ahead of Haddox throughout the most part of this game. Slight level differential in the jungle. The back and forth has been happening, you feel like, in the other 3 roles here in this game, where Big Man Tings now has a 1-level lead, and so does Netrioid. But it's really that solo gap in the XP department, I think, making up maybe a good chunk of the difference here in this game. And now we've reached that point, Gore, where it hasn't been flashy yet from Variety, but just that stalwart, late game, difficult to kill tank on the front line has been able to rotate out of solo lane and make an impact in the fights.
And he brings a lot. Look, Variety has been the essential member, I want to say. I mean, early on, I want to even argue maybe that he baited them in once that lurking in the waters is down. They're like, oh, cool, we can fight now. It's like, he's still got the pluck. He's still got anti-heal in his kit. He still has a lot of control. And that's the thing. There's so much just obnoxious CC on the side of the Kings. Like, ignore the stuns that Genetics brings and that Twig brings. You're going to be stepping into traps from Netroid, and that's one of the ones that it's not the end of the world for you, but it is just a little irritating, right? It's just one of those little problems. Oh, now you're getting knocked up by Hebo. Oh, now you're getting knocked up by Subak. Oh, now you're plucked. Like, they just have so much of that is the annoying things, right? That stack onto each other, that by themselves really don't mean as much to you, but when they start to add them together and factor them into the middle of a team fight, the Kings have a lot of just disposition and control that the Bolts are going to have to deal with. And plenty of ways, as you had highlighted, because Lasbra goes in, that bubble is popped really fast. He has his beads available now, so maybe the next fight it won't be the case, but there's a lot to pop that Magi's Cloak and a lot to try and control down where Lasbra is going to be and what kind of damage he's going to be able to get done.
I was wondering what Big Man Tings would do this game with his build. Usually there's some lifesteal built into it, and 3 big lifesteal items, 4 if you count the starter item there. And then, the question always becomes, well, if you go so heavy into lifesteal, then where does your penetration start to fit in? Charon's Coin, a great start there. Typhon's Fang has some % pen on there as well. Some of these tankier targets are going to be eating big percentage penetration numbers from Big Man Tings as this game goes on. So he's found a way to make both work in his build. Now, Big Man Tings and Netrioid find themselves effectively tied for top damage in the game. So the Camelot Kings carries here, Gormizer, absolutely bringing a big threat to the board. And we kind of see our first divergence from one another if we're continuing to look towards the carries here. Barracuda, he's gone into that kind of attack speed, tank bustery maybe mindset with a Titan's Bane on the back end, whereas Netrioid has worked a little bit more crit into his build on 2 very auto-attack centric picks.
I think it's just because Netrioid already has that stem, right? Like you're already getting attack speed somewhere from in your kit, and you can overcap it and go for the bow that is going to then translate some of that into power, but that's a lot of math and a lot of effort for one single item. At this point, you're just like, hey, I can stack crit up and hit hard real fast. That's all you need to know.
Sounds good to me.
And I think that's going to work out pretty well for him, whereas Barra kind of needs it. And honestly, this Hachiman hasn't, there's been some cool stuns from Barra, but he didn't really do a whole lot outside of that really sick Aussie player.
It's big damage onto the FG now as you see Netrioid just pouring it out. Venenu has to use the beads, but it's a great wall from Genetics, and Captain Twig finds the kill onto the Olympus Bolts mid laner. The Kings were happy to pull the FG just a moment ago. Now maybe without Venenu on the map, you see another pull.
I mean, yeah, no, absolutely, right? Like, you just took off one of the greatest. He didn't even have his transformation, or he didn't use his transformation. So you have a 4v5. You're at an advantage. You already did a lot of damage, but now you might not because Twig's done.
What has happened here? The Camelot Kings split themselves up. Netrioid and Big Man Tings on one side of the FG pit. And it's looking like Captain Twig and Variety alone on the other. And now the Olympus Bolts have evened up the score a little bit here. Big engage utility now missing. Lasbra has the bubble. Won't get it popped here. It's just damage finds its way on in. That is a necessary pick, though, for the Bolts because that FG is getting started up quickly, and it's maybe going down.
Now, here's the downside for Lasbra. That bubble, great, fantastic. He doesn't have a lot of protections otherwise, so we're going to see Netrioid just decimate him just like Barra did right there.
Big damage from Big Man Tings. Could be a double right around the backside here, but Genetics is the one to finish off the damage all on his own, and look at the chase down from the rest of the Camelot Kings. Instead, it's the Bolts that get baited on in, and now Big Man Tings will knock to the side Lasbra as the rest of the team rally around the FG.
Look, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I did say 22-minute mark. Look, 24 is close enough. Either way, in the grand scheme of things, it's exactly what you want to see. I mean, 3-0-4 from what was an otherwise just silent Big Man Tings for the beginning of this game. Netrioid, despite being 1-2-4, look at his damage. He's 4,000 behind Tings, but admittedly, you're going to trail Hebo. You're putting a lot of damage on the board, though, because he's number 2 in the game. And they were able to find a lot of high-value targets. And that's what these protectors can do. I mean, Variety, Twig, as well as Genetics. You get good stuns, it's either set up for Tings and Netrioid, or it's peel for Tings and Netrioid. And either way, they're going to be able to get a ton of damage done on the back end of that. Looks like he's going to go into Wind Demon here as the last item for Netrioid as well. And that is just going to, I mean, maybe just be a clean sweep at that point forward. Either upgrade your cowl or sell it for something else. You've got enough attack speed between the Ikaval and the Executioner and your stem. You're going to have enough crit here. Your power is just going to be difficult to deal with. And again, Lasbra doesn't have any physical prot items. Haddix, Jake can kind of withstand it, but they're definitely not in a comfortable position. And you can see Vin trying to pick something up here because they're just getting shredded right now.
They absolutely are, and Spectral Armor's now coming through, as you point out there, Gore, for the Olympus Bolts. So the crits ringing out just a little bit less here from Netrioid as the Oni Fury gets taken down. So many towers still left on the map, and this was kind of the case in Game 1 as well, but the scripts were flipped now where the Camelot Kings have 5 towers to work through against the Olympus Bolts here. And you're maybe already starting to consider Phoenix defenses because when you're this late into the game, you've got Fire John on everyone, your Hunter is nearly full build, this is when you see these structures crumble quickly.
I mean, with all the towers, the 5 that were standing going into this is 5,500 gold for the Kings. They've knocked down 2,000 of that, plus a Phoenix, which is absolutely worthwhile. I mean, there was no resistance on that one. They just knocked it down like it was nothing. And so I'm wondering where the Bolts are going to mount their defense. If it's not on the left side Phoenix, where are you trying to fight? What are you looking for? They're going to be able to knock down the 2 towers in mid almost like it's nothing, but you have to mount a defense somewhere.
You do have to, and it's not going to be underneath the left side Phoenix, so you can't imagine it's going to be underneath any of these towers here.
Oh, no.
So the Olympus Bolts will choose to fight somewhere else, it seems like. And it's a strategic, it's a slow pace, but in the right way call from the Camelot Kings. You get the left side Phoenix down, and you work towards mid from most to least important as far as the next FG siege goes. So mid lane tier 1 down, mid lane tier 2 being looked at, and actually the Olympus Bolts showing a little face here that they didn't necessarily do underneath their left side Phoenix, and now the fight begins. Haddix leaps into the back line.
Oh my god!
I don't know where Lasbro went. He's gone. He's missing. He is MIA. Find him on the back of a milk carton because the Camelot Kings have deleted him from the face of the map. Now Awesome Jake held in place, and the rest of the damage rolls through, but Jake able to leap away. You can't say the same for Barracuda. 2 down now for the Olympus Bolts, and the Camelot Kings surging in.
Yeah, you just end here. I mean, what are they going to do? Is Venenu going to look at you to death? He's not going to be able to withstand any of that.
No, I don't think so either, Gormizer. It's a crushing wave from Venenu on the transformation, but it's all but a deicide here as Haddix clings to a red health bar, and the Camelot Kings, they'll work in 5 strong with the FG, and they'll take game number 2.
So, Deathbringer gets finished, Typhon's Fang gets finished. That was when the game was over. I didn't realize it at the time, but apparently that was exactly the case. I mean, 2, 2, and 7, it's not the most glamorous slash line here if you're looking at Netroid, but it is exactly what you need if you look at his damage output alongside what Tings was able to do. I mean, they did exactly what they wanted early on, which was coast through the beginning of the game. They just didn't need pressure on Netroid. They didn't need pressure on Tings, and there wasn't a lot asserted on them, so they didn't have to worry too much about that. Roll it forward into adding Sobek Ymir as your front line. All of a sudden, you've got all the room in the world to work with. And it seems like it paid off in dividends. I mean, that was a great kill. Lasbro just disappeared.
Yeah, he was gone.
He was gone.
I looked away for a half second, and all I saw was Lasbro dead on the screen there. Looks like it's going to be a day of game number 3s, and we've got another one for you right after this.
Hello and welcome back to the SMITE Pro League powered by Alienware. And before we get into breaking down everything that just took place in game number 2, I want to go ahead and remind you guys back at home who are watching that there is a limited time opportunity to head on over to shop.smiteproleague.com and cop some of the freshest Pride merch available on the market. And the best part about it all is that every single one of these proceeds will be donated directly to the Trevor Project. So if you want to support a good cause and sport some fashionable gear in the process, shop.smiteproleague.com, and you can always use code Mifflin for that extra little $5 off. So always got to keep that in mind. And yes, Mifflin, I have to once again pedal out to your bank account.
Look, all that money goes to the Trevor Project, so just pay it. Just pay the money. Just extra $5. It's not me trying to protect my own bank account. Obviously, I'm not concerned about that at all. I'm just trying to fight for a good cause here.
Fair enough, Mifflin. Just like how the Bolts are trying to fight their way back into this set, given that things are now all tied up between the Bolts and the Camelot Kings. A very strong response after what went down in Game 1. And Camelot Kings, they certainly looked like some kings on the map here. More specifically, Big Man Tings doing the big man things with that Habois, Mifflin.
Look, I've talked about Big Man Tings ad nauseum today, sometimes unprompted legitimately, but now I think finally given the opportunity to talk about him. This Habois was nigh unstoppable, man. He was ulting in aggressively and then continuing the aggression. Very often we'll see Habois do exactly this. Crushing wave, hit 2 or 3 people, and then die. Well, Big Man Tings kind of skipped a step at the end there. Decided maybe dying is just not in my best interest.
That front line as well that was provided by the likes of Captain Twig on the Fenrir, the Sobek, the Amir. There's just so much to kind of intervene and interrupt with the Olympus Bolts dive composition. And unless the Bolts were all grouped up, and even when they were, it tended to work against them. Barracuda just did not really get much of an opportunity to play the game, just getting gobbled up by those crushing waves.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm thinking back to that Gold Fury fight where Barracuda was starting to work his way forward. Big Man Ting says, "Oh, word? You're trying to play this game?" Immediately removes him from the map. And kind of just the entire game with a 1,200 damage ultimate. We thought maybe the Habois would have a little bit of troubles because of this Morgan being able to equally one-shot him or turn into the Fenrir and get a somewhat favorable matchup there, but it just never came up. Big Man Tings, a huge threat on the battleground. 21,000 damage. Netroid putting up a remarkable 19k himself, but doesn't quite break that 20k barrier.
Yeah, he had all crit, by the way, but, tell me again about how difficult mages are. Aggro. He's not here to defend himself, so we're allowed to call
I hate
that
aggro.
Now. Yeah, we all do.
Fat
Don't
egg.
worry. Don't worry. But he's that aggro,
Yeah,
aggro.
that one.
But honestly, Mifflin, when you're looking at the breakdown of Game 2 as one of the members of the Olympus Bolts, where do you think that their mind starts to go? Do you think that it's an immediate response of just taking out the Habois, or do you think that there were other issues stemming around that?
I think the Habois was a byproduct of the composition. It's not so much that the god itself is just that strong, just unstoppable, if you would. I think it's that the Olympus Bolts didn't have a draft that was really well suited towards dealing with it. They didn't have a draft that could even really legitimately put up a defense. They didn't have a standard mage, so minion waves walking into the Phoenix very easily. I think, if anything, the Bolts need to worry more so about their own draft instead of the Kings.
And do you think that it's likely that in game number 3, as we head into the picks and bans for this final matchup of this series, is there a chance that we see Netroid on the Artemis one more time? Because he took that in the top 3. You have to remember that as well.
Yeah, it takes in the top 3 a very counterable god, a very immobile god, but still unconcerned about it. I guess Artemis is just back in it. We're just in it for the long haul now. No longer is it just Zardemis on the battleground. Instead, this is just a pick that I think we can get used to seeing. Synergizes very well with this new attack speed build coming through. Could go for the Silver Branch, could go full crit, even though it's not that crit passive that you used to have. It's additional damage on CC now. I promise you, I read the wiki. I think that Artemis is going to be okay, at least for the first couple of weeks, but I'm still an On Her fanboy. I still like gods like the Wool. I think Jingwei is still incredibly strong as well. So I don't think that we're going to see too much changes week in, week out. But for now, I guess I'm an Artemis truther.
See, I'm on the other end of the spectrum here. I'm all for playing devil's advocate. Run it back. Season 5, Artemis, S-tier pick. One more time, mid-season changes. She is now the greatest hunter available.
Full stop.
Okay, the last bit might have been a little bit of a troll. I can't give her greatest hunter credibility, given that there are a lot of other strong ADC options still up for grabs. But she's definitely worked herself back up into the competitive tier, at least.
Yeah, I think she's certainly found herself playable here at the SPL level. Clearly, with Netroid putting out as much damage as he did on such an unsafe god, and he wasn't the only one playing an unsafe god. The entire backline for the Camelot Kings was pretty unsafe between Hebois and Artemis together. So if she can work there, I think she can work most places. Into Fafnir in particular, just a good matchup. Every time he transformed to a dragon, if he wasn't getting knocked up by Hebo, he was getting trapped by Artemis.
Well, one thing's for sure, the Bolts, they're definitely trying to keep their flexibility and their options open by taking Sol in that first pick position. Have to remember, though, the Kings, they've been prioritizing the likes of Amir very early on. I'd imagine that they could potentially look for another Amir or Sobek pickup here as just a means of establishing their front line. There's also just a possibility of maybe leaning a little bit more towards a favorable matchup here for Big Man Ting, since the Bolts have been trying to place so much emphasis towards making sure that Big Man Tings is on a less comfortable pick.
Every time I see Sol get locked in first, it's just it's that threat of the double hunter, air quotes, composition with Fafnir and a legitimate hunter, and that makes me feel a little bit concerned, and maybe the Kings feeling the same way could decide to shift up their P's and B's, go towards that Fafnir to deny the Bolts the possibility of a composition like that. But you've already highlighted it. They love this Ymir pick. Brings nigh unparalleled control inside the jungle, a 7-second wall, pretty hard to argue against, great early game presence, as long as he doesn't fall behind, doesn't have very great comeback mechanics. But Ho Yi, this high up in the draft, that's interesting.
Ho Yi, maybe just to introduce a little bit more, buckle down on that AoE presence that Amir is also able to provide, given the wall cutoffs, the frost breath is, more importantly, just the ultimate from Amir. 2 giant circles and 2 giant slows from both this Amir Ho Yi. It's a little bit more of a classic dual lane composition, but, and this is probably a little bit too far out there, but there is a small chance this could be for Ho Yi mid.
Could be Ho Yi mid. I mean, if we're going to go ahead and talk about
like
flex,
hunters.
Could be Ymir jungle. I mean, if we're going real wild with it, even Ymir solo, it is likely going to be the duo lane here locked in already for the Camelot Kings, and there's some decent synergies there. Not only is it great slow down CC from both ultimates, but also you can just line up double bounces wherever you want. Find the freeze, throw up a wall, all of a sudden you're getting slammed for 600 damage from Ricochet. So I do like the threat of pressure from the Camelot Kings here. It's going to be mainly up to Ymir inside that long lane to find minion wave pressure. Ho Yi not really all that well known for his ability to clear the wave. Meanwhile, on the side of the Bolts, well, Yamoja is known for her ability to clear the wave as well as sustain. Bolts have a ton of sustain already. Guan Yu and Yamoja for team-wide healing, Sol for self-sustain.
And it's really crazy to think about how much healing promise is actually available right now for the Bolts. It's not going to be very easy for the Kings. Possibly going to be needing to introduce some early anti-heal towards their itemization choices for the early to mid-game. But Baba Yaga will make her face shown yet again. And Mifflin, she's kind of been a hot pick on the market here today for SPL play. Why do you think that is?
She's got exclusive Baba Yaga tech, right? She's the only one who can just go for these stacking items and not think about it. Like, when you buy Warlock Staff on any other god, you're thinking to yourself, oh god, I gotta stack this up for the next 10 minutes. Baba Yaga does not have that concern. It's essentially a raw power spike the second she finishes up that item. I think she's gonna be pretty good in the meta. Now that you don't have to buy boots, just Warlock Staff, maybe a Book of Thoth if you're feeling saucy, Karen's Coin, whatever you want, you're going to get those stacks pretty quick.
And how do you like this Baba Yaga into the likes of the current Bolt composition? Because we talk about all the sustain and the possibility of some early anti-heal maybe needing to come through. Do you think that Baba Yaga has one of the easier applications of that anti-heal?
She can apply it easily to at least one person. That Potion Toss is generally pretty easy ability to land, but maybe not the largest AoE possible. It's really applying the Divine Ruin once you get into that ultimate stance. Start to mount up your house, start throwing out fires. All of a sudden, not only is it just that initial burst of damage from the tossed out ability, but also it leaves a fire pool on the ground, all of which going to be applying Divine Ruin. And she's got good disengage up against what the Bolts have already drafted. It's very one note in how they're looking to initiate these fights. Guan Yu Cavalry Charge. Okay, let me hop over a wall or something. If Yamoja looks for her ultimate, all right, let me hop over a water wall or something.
Well, seems as the Bolts are certainly going to be in a little bit of a scramble here in terms of the counter initiation, because the Camelot Kings, they are working with circles of all sizes here, Mifflin. They have small ones from Baba Yaga, and then the not as small ones from Umbats, Oyi, and the Amir. I'm really liking all of this AoE presence, though, that has come through so far for the Camelot Kings. I think this is a really well thought out composition so far, and if this is a Kuzumbo lock-in, that could be incredibly problematic for the likes of a Circuit and Shibalanke, most noticeably Deathbane. Very interruptible ability if it's actually the Kuzumbo, but the Terra leads me to believe that could potentially be genetics actually on this Terra choice, and then the Amir in the solo lane, and you might have been toying around with it initially.
Well, you thought I was joking? I wasn't joking. No, I was serious.
You're serious the whole time.
I knew that was going to happen.
Poker face. 100%.
100%.
Never had a doubt.
Look at me, chat. I knew that was going to happen. I knew Ymir
Just like
was having the solo
throw
lane.
$5 on it.
How am I going to throw $5 that Ymir's going into the solo lane? You want me to bet the chat $5 again? Have I not learned my lesson? Well,
No, I think
I
you
feel
learned
like I
your
win this
lesson.
bet this time. All right, yeah. Ymir's going to the solo lane, chat. Go ahead and line up with me. And if you guys are right, you can just use the code again. Just use code Mifflin again.
Mifflin. What if it's Terra solo?
No, it's not.
It might actually be Terra solo
No,
here,
it's not.
Mifflin. It's
Why would it be?
You know, technically speaking, though, I think if you win this bet, you might possibly owe chat nothing.
No, but all right, yeah.
It
So
counts
if you
us out.
guys used code
Cancels
Mifflin
out.
already and you took this bet, I can't be betting people literally every week. You guys are goading me into this. Let's talk about the meta.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Let's talk about what's happening on the screen here. I like this Circuit lock-in. Lazra is one of his best gods, and it's locked in almost exclusively to deal with this Baba Yaga. The dive potential, the ability to hop on her back when she's inside the house and then disengage with the dot damage makes sense. It's going to be one of their better tools to deal with Baba Yaga in these late-game team fights. Hopefully, chat doesn't remember what I said.
Do you feel as though the Circuit can maybe encounter some struggles, though, with that dive potential, given the fact that Amir, Terra both introduce a pretty steep amount of crowd control, and then when you factor in the Fear No Evil as the cherry on top here for the Camelot Kings, Circuit may be going to have to rely a little bit more on cooldown reduction in order to get the job done.
She may be, but you're not worried too much about the Fear No Evil from Hunbots, because it's very likely that he's going to be utilizing that to dive himself. I think generally Circuit is going to be playing the edge of a team fight as the solo agent, waiting for that initiation from the Camelot Kings, and then looking for that counter punch.
And we saw the success that the Bolts had with Shibalanke in game number 1 off that global blind. Do you feel as though that's going to pose some issues here again for the Kings initiation?
I'm not as concerned about this global blind as you are, Taco. I think you like that Darkest of Nights ultimate a little bit more than I do. Used to have a stun on it, no longer does. I'm just going to use my raw Daredevil game sense to know what's happening.
Well, we'll get a chance to find out whether or not you were right with the Amir and Terra, and whether or not the Olympus Bolts close this one out, or if the Kings reign supreme. Dulcin Gore, take it away.
It's the game number 3 to decide who matches up to ball. Oh, it's Terra Solo. It's Terra Solo. Sound the alarm. Yeah, baby. Wow, Mifflin owes us 5 and everyone else 5. He's 90K in the hole.
Well, hold on. He said yes, then no. He revoked the consent of the bet, so I'll give it to him.
No way. No way. It's Terra Solo. Miff looked in the windows of my soul. He looked into the lens of the camera, burned a hole in the back of my head, and said, I'll bet you again, chat. It's Ymir Solo for sure.
So,
all right, so I don't know what we do for the second time, but
he must have forgotten the age-old time of Terra Solo. Like, it's been a thing, man. It's been a thing. Technically, Ymir was a thing as well over there.
What
in
did
the
he just
solo
say?
lane.
Something
But
about his
Terra,
sharpened edge, God-given game sense or something like that?
Yeah,
too?
well, he said he was going to use his Daredevil game sense
all right,
in the Darkest of Nights.
So Mifflin, in one fell swoop, has damaged his wallet and whatever reputation his game sense had, because 0 for 2 here, 0 for 2 here on this one. Let's talk about it a little bit though here, Gore. Let's get ourselves back in the realm of seriousness, because this is a pretty important matchup here. Camelot Kings, Olympus Bolts, both of them 1-0 so far here in phase number 2, so you'll have another team at 2-0, but look at this early pressure on the big man Tings. You can't walk that way, my friend. Lasbra gets the body blocks in, and the Olympus Bolts off to a first blood start.
Tower's the other way, friend. That's the only place that's going to be safe. Honestly, even at that low health, I don't know that the tower is truly safe. Good. That's a great first blood to get. Look, a minute in, you are absolutely. Look at this rotation. They want a little bit more. Maybe it's just going to result in the Oracles But that could have been a thicker rotation for the Bolts, and I think that's the kind of pressure that they want to apply into this. And I think they have it. Look, late game, I'm going to say this again. I said it last game, but late game, I am terrified of the Kings. I think that is a very, very bad composition to try and fight into because you're going to have Terra heals, Terra control. She just got a buff. When she's dead, she can clap her walls together. That's not really that big a deal. But it does matter because it's what was in the patch notes here for 8.7. But you get a Hunbats, you get a Baba Yaga, you get a late game Hu Yi, and of course the control that the Terra and the Ymir are going to bring. The Kings in 22 to 25 minutes are going to be deadly.
Oh, yeah.
Unless the Bolts can do what they did at 1 minute pretty, consistently throughout the next 10 to 15, where they just constantly shut you down. They also have a really devastating late game draft. I'm going to give it to them. The Bolts, with a Serket late game, that true damage is going to be able to hit, but Barracuda as well does just better and better as time goes on.
I'm nervous about Venenu here as well. The Soul is going to do some serious damage to backline, especially with the ultimate when that starts to connect. I want to follow along with Big Man Tings. His build, notably, in this game. Baba Yaga has been in such an interesting spot where the kind of pause, the almost timing on that potion got changed a little bit back, and she felt a lot better to play. Now some changes have rolled through with this pick, numbers-wise. That makes her maybe a little bit more viable. And if you don't have to go for the boots, if you want to, go into some stacking items, you can get those online a little bit earlier. So that's something I'll be kind of updating myself on, as well as all the viewers out there as this game goes on. Looks like Warlock's maybe early on here for Big Man Tings. Variety, though, has felt all right here so far in the solo lane. Got taken low a couple of times. Lazarus poked his head on over here to the right, but Vampiric Shroud is the start here for Variety. Maybe help sustain up in that lane a little bit, because Haddix is going to be chipping away at that health bar.
And I think Haddix, this is the window right now. Once the ult comes online, or now that it is online, Variety may be feeling a little less pressure. Serket still applies a lot, but it kind of harkens back to the last lane for solo, where it's just, if Twig shows up, maybe they find a kill, maybe they don't. But it's going to be a lot of pressure. Now it's on to Jake.
Oh, it is on to Jake. His one stun connects. Genetics looked for the second. And Awesome Jake with the Riptide able to stay alive and get out, but he has to go on back to base. This is going to be a little XP boost for Genetics, who will be able to stick around for maybe just one more wave over here on the left. Not often that you see a Yamoja kind of out-bullied, but this Ho Yi pick, I think, is pretty interesting here, Gore. A couple of picks, maybe. Actually, you probably know better than I do. Feel like we've seen him a couple of times so far in Season 8, maybe once or twice, if that. Season 7 saw a little bit of play. But now maybe we're seeing some variety here in the Hunters, what the builds start to look like. Ho Yi got lockdown, got good damage, great ultimate for objective secure, even team fight damage. So I wouldn't be surprised if this pick starts to see more play.
I'm wondering how much of this is wide variety and hey, all of these picks are viable, and how much of it is still trying to narrow down what
is and is not. Right, what is and is not viable. Barracuda uses his ultimate here on the red buff invade for the Olympus Bolts. And the red buff is dropped down. Genetics looks for the wall and the freeze onto Lasbra. Won't matter as Lasbra leaps on out and away. Serket has reached level 5, so there's going to be some lockdown on priority targets here if the Olympus Bolts choose to use it. Over here on the left, Captain Twig also has his ultimate. Fear No Evil will be massive in these fights for good damage and good lockdown. Now Genetics will wall himself into a corner, happy to do it, but Awesome Jake has to be careful here. Captain Twig in one fell swoop could set up another kill.
The walls on walls. It was wallception either way. Genetics stays alive. That's what matters the most, I think, in those regards. The other thing that's interesting, so watching Naomi, this is something that was, again, a change brought to Yamoja here in 8-7. And that Jake is going to be playing with. You watch Zomi going into level 6. He's going to be able to get an extra one. That originally was built up based on your items. Now it's kind of freed the flexibility, so Jake's going to be able to go maybe a little more standard itemization for what his team needs, what he needs, and what's going to work well against the Kings, as opposed to, all right, so I've got to get a certain amount of mana, and I got to get a certain amount of MP5 to make sure I get the benefits of my passive. And so that makes things a little more interesting to watch as he levels up and how much impact this Yamoja will have. We saw, this was the winning combo for the Leviathans in Game 1 of today, right? When you grab Yamoja, you grab Guan Yu, you grab Soul, usually that's enough.
Yeah, you grab a kill or two, maybe grab a win here for the Olympus Bolts. It's a cavalry charge exchanged for a blink as Captain Twig will have to use that one defensively. That's actually a pretty big win here for the Bolts. The ability to blink in, drop a Fear No Evil, important. But this time, Captain Twig uses the Fear No Evil to escape, but escape he will not as Venenu drops the fire on Captain Twig in the backline. Genetics being whittled away, back steps on the stun, just shy of getting out, and Lasbra makes them pay. Olympus Bolts now grab another couple kills.
I mean, just control. You get a couple of ults burned down by the Kings and the kills, and ultimately you expend, admittedly, a few ults of your own, but Haddix loses his beats. That's kind of the biggest takeaway for it. Now Variety's in trouble.
Wow, you don't often see this kind of pressure put on a tanky member of the solo lane. Variety finds a double stun. This could be a big turnaround, a double root as well. But the pop-off was not to be as Variety gets taken down by Haddix, nonetheless playing with fire just a bit there, though. I think that's about as well played as it could have been for Variety. I mean, no chance there. They wanted you dead in solo, and they got you dead.
And that was one of those, it had all potential to be interesting. If that tower is a tier 2 instead, they're dead. And honestly, if it's 3 minutes ago, they're dead. It's just the nature of the game. Everything beefs up, and Haddix having that Breastplate of Valor online already has those physical prots.
Seen
so
that
he's not
a bunch today, haven't we?
Stressed out. Yeah, and I mean, gotta look at it. It's got good physical prots, but it's got good cooldown reduction. I think it feels great. Specifically, like Terra, once her cooldown's up a lot. Same thing. What was it on Variety last game as well for the
Yeah,
Sobek?
I feel like we've seen it a few times.
If I'm looking at Haddix, I'm thinking, man, how do I get the most out of my heal? Oh, I get any CDR that I can find.
Yep.
And so that's absolutely, it's going to be helpful for him overall throughout this, and I think it's going to be helpful for the team in about 10 minutes.
Oh, Netrioid, oh my god, what's it? Oh, John Travolta. All right, this is going to make some sense. John Travolta, I'm not bringing that up for no reason.
Netroid, John Travolta. Those were the words you just said together. I just want you to hear that.
I had the meme in my head where he's looking around with his arms out.
Oh, yeah.
Searching, and I lost his name at the last second, and so I caught myself by just saying John Travolta when I remembered. I'll now get back to the original point. Netrioid doing the John Travolta right now, as everyone else on the team has gotten a death so far, but Netrioid, the lone member, with a 0 in the death column, so pretty evenly split amongst all the Camelot Kings as far as who has received the pressure now, who is benefiting from that pressure on the Bolts. Lasbros found himself a couple of kills, but then it's a 1-level lead in effectively every other role. It's about a half-level lead out of the jungle there, so the Olympus Bolts starting to slowly build up this lead here, Gore. It's 2.5, maybe 2.3K already in the gold department. Maybe no surprise, they're starting to see some gold or some red buff pressure.
With 4 kills under their belts, this is exactly what you need. And again, this is kind of how I had highlighted to keep up that pace that you dictated at the very beginning. You get a kill at 1 minute, you got to keep going with that kind of pace to make sure that you can stay ahead of this team, because if they catch up in level, they catch up in gold, the Kings are going to be a very devastating late game composition to have to go up against. And I think that the Bolts scale just as well into the late game, especially with their sustain that they're going to be able to bring.
Yep.
But you already see the Brawlers online. Admittedly, Baba Yaga doesn't have the easiest time with the Divine Ruin, but still is going to be able to apply that no problem. But you're going to see anti-heal items from Variety and Genetics. It's abundant for frontline. So you have to keep this pressure up while you can before your team comp starts to kind of fall behind just in terms of the itemization. And right now, they're doing it, like you said, wonderfully. I mean, hovering around 3,000 gold ahead. They're just looking for a Gold Fury soon.
And it feels like, and you look at the net worth charts on the left, that's all evenly spread. It's not like one person on the Olympus Bolts has this massive 1K, 2K, 3K gold lead over their counterpart. Effectively, everyone is 400 or 500 gold ahead of who they're looking at on the other side. So getting into that one tier of item range, not the end of the day just yet, but that it is important as far as getting these builds underway. So a great start now for the Olympus Bolts, but the Camelot Kings, as you've mentioned, just buying some time to get some of these late game factors online. Big Man Tings will store those potions on into the consumable slot as the game goes on. You get a good potion, you got to hold it for a little bit of that extra burst damage. And I think we saw earlier on with this Baba Yaga pick, the house is probably such a frustrating ultimate to deal with, but it probably feels great for Big Man Tings. If you're able to kite backwards and just send some of that damage out, it does some serious numbers by the end.
Yeah, those firebolts, especially because they're homing, they track onto gods. Like, it feels good to be able to throw it out there.
House.
And you get a little bit of the shielding that's going to come through as well, so it's survivable in that nature as well. Really good for a retreat, especially in the middle of a team fight if things are going, even if they're going your way. If you're just having to get out of there, I think it's going to be a good look for Tings. Already has the full stacks online for that Warlock staff as well, so feeling pretty comfortable early on. And I think this is the transition. I think we saw, one person go double stacks earlier, and otherwise it's been more of the, okay, we'll get the Warlocks, and then we're just going to look for the power spikes wherever we can find them.
Big Man Tings taunted back through by Lasbra just for a moment, but we've seen a lot of this. Big Man Tings backing away as the Olympus Bolts have been able to find pressure in the mid lane. Now it's Variety stunned on through. Genetics throws up a wall, but it only keeps Haddix at bay. Look at the damage numbers rolling through from Venenu. Lasbra uses the ultimate here. Variety gets taunted right back through. There's got to be enough damage there, and there is. And Lasbra is on a killing spree.
I mean, and admittedly, it's not a big deal, but the poison spreads just slightly. I think actually might have hit Twig there as well with the glowing green around him. So it may take of damage that's going to come to him. But this is a good re-engage.
Watch out, Haddix. You got to be careful here. It's a Fear No Evil that sends the backline of the Bolt spreading, but they immediately turn it down, and now Barracuda has notched his first kill of the game, and the Camelot Kings forfeit the Tier 1, and they'll find safety in their Tier 2.
This is one of those moments. Do you push forward, look for the fight? You could probably get 2 more kills onto that tower, or do you go for a gold Fury? Hey, guess what? Let's go ahead and grab more gold. That's what we need in our pockets if we're the Bolts. It's going to be a lot of experience in this
6K, 12 minutes in. This is getting a little out of hand early on here. It's 6 kills, but then it's the advantage that you find on the back of those kills. It's only 5.1K. Not that drastic, Dave. It doesn't go that crazy. The Gold Fury doesn't. This is on the back end of only 6 kills. The pressure in the farming and the invades and all of that has really built up here for the Olympus Bolts, and that's kept the Camelot Kings at bay further than just the standard 6 kills would have. I think Lasbra's had a great set so far here today. Maybe a bit by the wayside in the loss there in game number 2, but earlier on looked great. And now another good performance here. He's loving getting that bubble early on in these jungle builds, and I guess why not? You find some value with it there in game 2 despite a loss, and it still looks good here so far in game 3.
I'm going to dive even deeper into that and say that Lasbra's had just a hell of a year, right? I mean,
so.
Season 8 has been way better for Lasbra than what we got to see in Season 7. Season 7, Lasbra had some peaks that were made him look like one of the best junglers in the world. And he had some valleys that made him questioning whether or not the Bolts were ever going to be able to get anywhere. This year has been way more consistent, and now they're walking in on Variety, and that's just another clean kill.
Yeah, that's Variety just walking on in there, and the Pyromancer pulled off just for a second, but now down low here. Genetics could throw some damage, but I think would be risky given the amount of damage that we know the Olympus Bolts have. So, cresting that 40,000 gold mark here shortly, and that'll be about a 6,500 gold lead for the Olympus Bolts. So this one's starting to get away from the Camelot Kings just a bit, but you can't count out a team with the type of scaling that we've discussed here, Gore, and it's really a lot on big man Tings. Netrioid is going to maybe have a similar path to what Barracuda has. Netrioid has 1,400 in hand, but Barracuda has a kin size over what Netrioid has here. Could be a chance for a kill, but Awesome Jake not taking a lot of damage. This is 4 members of the Camelot Kings doing damage to the Yamocha.
Oh no, Twig!
And they are not going to get the kill cleanly. Lasbra is at least able to return the favor. Captain Twig needed to get something going, but he grabs 1 kill, the first kill of the game for himself and the Kings, goes on to Awesome Jake.
Now, see, when you highlight it that way, it's the first kill for the Kings, worthwhile. When you highlight it, hey, I just traded my jungler for their support, not so much, really. I mean, at this point, I guess it's worthwhile to kill anybody on the Bolts as long as you can get the kill.
You'd love
but you are
Lasbra.
definitely feeling a little bit more. Yeah, Lasbra would be maybe my number 1 go-to, probably then Vin, then Haddix, then Bear as of right now, but that's sure to change as the time goes on, depending on who ends up putting out a lot of this pressure.
So freeze onto Venenu, and look at this. Venenu says, thank you very much. I'll turn this one around, please. It's a stun, though, from Variety onto Ven. The Aegis gets used, but it's a bit late. But the damage has been done, and it's been done by Ven. Barracuda whirls around, grabs the kill onto Variety, and now the chase is on as Genetics finds the double freeze, but the Riptide forces the Ymir off to the side. Venenu will be there to chase down just a bit more damage. Netrioid survives, but you won't be able to say the same, I think, for Genetics as the Ymir stumbles on away. Lasbra might be able to close this gap.
I was going to say, somebody's got to get there.
There you go.
Looks like they will be able to find it. Lasbra actually
like
getting the kill.
worst case scenario, yeah.
Is maybe
keeps going.
Well, I was going to say worst case scenario for Kings, best case scenario for the Bolts, right? You get another kill right under the belt there for Lasbra. And it feels really great. But let's talk about the map, right? Because you had kind of highlighted it. Look, it's 10-1. It's 8,000 gold that's separating these two teams. That's pretty hefty. There's a lot of experience. 3 levels in solo, 1 in the jungle, 1 in mid, 2 in support, and then 2 down there for the carries. But there's still 4 towers standing. There's still a Fire Giant. There's still a lot of little avenues for the Kings. And to rinse and repeat, this is very difficult to do. The way the Bolts have gotten this gold lead, it's from great farming. It's from not objective steals. It's the gold furies, but also stealing away camps. That kind of, I guess, mini objectives in their own way. But being able to strip experience away and force the Kings into bad spots, but also straight up in these team fights where they've been able to win it. That being said, 4,500 gold in Tier 2s. Another 1,500 gold on top of that in tier 1s that is just sitting on the map for the Kings to be able to come through. So they have tons of way to reel this back in their favor. They just have to get into a point where they can start knocking it down. It's gold caches for a reason. It's just waiting to line their pockets. It's just getting there. Unfortunately, the team fights haven't been really sure enough to say, hey, Kings, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get that 6,000 gold in the matter of a few seconds. No, it's going to take a while. It's going to be some hard work.
You're doing your job, Gordon. You're throwing a lifeline onto the Camelot Kings, and I think that's the right way to look at it, because there is still the avenue with some of the scaling back into the game, but I think we've also mentioned, and correctly mentioned, that it's not like the bolts scale poorly. You're going to have big damage from Bera, from Venenu, and then some tankiness from Haddix and Awesome Jake. And Jake wants to do some damage as well. He's got Spear of Desolation right after the Gauntlet of Thieves here. And so, Awesome Jake is up on the damage charts over what Captain Twig has been able to provide. You don't love seeing that here. Unbats with Brawlers, Hydras, and Serrated Edge beneath the enemy support. Chance for Jake to do some more damage here as a leap away from Netrioid, and the ultimate gets used. Beads on the back end, as Haddix looks for the immediate stun with the Cavalry Charge. 3 caught into the River's Rebuke, but this one just a separator as the Tier 2 gets taken down.
Now, the downside, you had kind of highlighted it. Like, yeah, I'm sitting here saying, hey, look at all the cool things they could do. There's still 5,000 gold sitting on the map of the Camelot Kings. That's been whittled down to 3,000, but there's another 2K that the Bolts have been able to put into their pockets. It's getting to the point where, I mean, they're approaching the 1,000 mark, or the 10,000
mark. Evil. It's a Fear No Evil that finds a couple members of the Olympus Bolts, spreads them out just a bit underneath the Primal Fury. But I feel like that's been the case for Captain Twig. The Fear No Evil gets dropped down, maybe even catches a couple member of the Bolts, but there just hasn't been the opening for the rest of the Camelot Kings to engage. Primal Fury started, reset, and now started up once again. And it's the Olympus Bolts playing separator here. Awesome Jake does not have the River's Rebuke, so the Camelot Kings will have a cleaner route back in if they choose to contest onto the Fury. But look at this, the back line has been dove, and it's Captain Twig pulled back in, and Lasbra gets his 6th kill of the game. And then the rest of the Camelot Kings get run down. Big CC on the back end, though, and Big Man Tings absolutely melting damage through the rest of the Olympus Bolts. But Gore, I'm not sure it's enough.
Well, hey, guess what? This is where the sustain comes in. You've got a good amount of anti-heal on the one side, but just too much healing, it feels like. On the other, now Variety is the one who's getting caught out. Him Genetics are too low to continue fighting. Worst case scenario for the Bolts, they just get a Primal Fury and a kill onto Twig. And just a Primal Fury and a kill onto Twig? Dave, that's wonderful for a team fight.
Well, compared to how the rest of the game has been going. So Primal Fury, yes. How about the rest of the kills? Look how low the Kings are. An Awesome Jake hits a beautiful Riptide and then a stun, but Genetics with a great wall has delayed the onslaught from the Olympus Bolts, but Venenu strolls right on through, and Lasbra does as well. It's an unstoppable Circuit, and the Bolts might be unstoppable as well.
I don't think delayed has ever been more appropriately used. It just slowed them down for half a second, maybe 2 seconds total right there, and now the Bolts can just make a beeline. I don't know how confident they're feeling in a Fire Giant attempt right here. I mean, they've got 10 seconds to work with without having to worry about Genetics, 20 seconds without Netroid. Might be able to just go ahead and smack down both, especially with Bera and Haddix sitting over here. Sorry, Bera and Venenu sitting over here.
Some good gold, I think, in the back pockets of the Bolts. Think about what just happened. They got a Fury that's... It was 2.3K.
A lot just occurred.
It was 2.3K for Venenu. We didn't see it before they all purchased stuff up, but I think it's pretty safe to assume 1K plus for effectively everyone there on the Olympus Bolts. You get a Tier 2 down, you get a Primal Fury down, you get a big team fight win as well.
Oh, man.
Lasbra is just a nuisance, isn't he, to Big Man Tings? And actually, this is something I think the desk correctly highlighted on how bad this Baba Yaga might feel against the Circuit, especially when Lasbra has built the extra CC immunity into his kit, beads, and the bubble awaiting to get popped. Big Man Tings, you got high damage in this game. Your top damage in the game. A lot of it thanks to the house in that last fight. But Lasbra's got his eyes on you. Big Man Tings is just going to get jumped on.
It's just difficult, right? I mean, your Baba Yaga, admittedly, you have some survivability and some escape ability.
Yep.
But it's so far and few in between, and Circuit's so good at chasing you down, like you said. You're just going to feel like you're sat on. Luckily, though, and this is a weird luckily, but you did just technically burn Lasbra's ult. He didn't get the kill because that wall, the jump, he had to make the decision, am I going to go for the fight? Am I going to go for anything else?
I don't know.
Unfortunately, you can't say the same thing for Twig here. 1-5, man, 0-7 earlier. I mean, look, unfortunately, Twig, and this is
forget.
by no means a reflection on Twig. This is just how well the Bolts are controlling the jungle. They did it in Game 1. They're doing it again in Game 3. It's just the way the entire thing is falling. The cookie's crumbling here for the Kings because they just haven't been able to find it. That being said, look, 3 minutes from now is when I think some of the big power spikes are going to come online. Granted, I'm going to go ahead and have to adjust that for gold deficits.
Yeah, they're 13K behind.
Maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes from now, especially with this Fire Giant going towards the Bolts, Dave. It's getting a lot more difficult to be the Kings here. It is not an easy transition.
Yep.
And while there's still a lot for them to be able to pick up that's on the map to get them some gold, to get them some of those items, it's not going to come anywhere near easily enough. They need a sick defense before they can even start pushing back against the Bolts here.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Venenu's at the point in his build now where he's swinging. He's got Soul Reaver on the back end of a little percent pen, little flat pen, so every target on the Camelot Kings is going to be taking a little bit more damage from Ven, I think, that they wagered for in some of these fights. The Camelot Kings are going to have to put up a base defense here, Gourmizer, underneath the right side. Phoenix, you know, gold differential is enough, and that might be enough to slow down even the best of Phoenix defenses. That's one way to do it. Variety burns the beads off of Venenu. They're out of the mid lane, fearing a re-engagement. Lasbra could make his way over the wall here, and in he does go. It's a double taunt on through, but there's no follow-up on a Genetics. What happened to Haddix? It's Netrioid who gets the opening kill on the other end of the River's Rebuke. It's a great start to this defense from the Camelot Kings, and the rest of the damage rolls on out of the base as the red side continues to work for Genetics with the big wall. Big man Tings with another kill here in this fight. The Olympus Bolts have lost 3. The Olympus Bolts will lose 4, and the big man Tings has got the double.
And Lasbra looking to run away with his life. That is such a great defense from the Kings. And all comes down to the fact that Lasbra unfortunately wasn't able to get anything down on the back end. With 35 seconds now, I'm looking at definitely a tier 2, probably a Phoenix. Lasbra might even be able to pick someone up on the back end. Look, nobody's really paying attention to Twig or Netrioid. And so Lasbra might be able to find something. He still has a Fire Giant buff.
There's so many towers on the map. So this has got to be a Phoenix and leave. If you're the Camelot Kings, Lasbra is in behind here, spotted out, or at least the Kings definitely know he's here. Haddix has respawn. Lasbra uses his ultimate. It's a stun from Variety, and it actually looks like the Olympus Bolts have delayed the Phoenix. Has it been an overstay, though, for at least Captain Twig? The answer is yes. Netrioid will disengage. The rest of the Bolts respawn. Lasbra, the only one with FG, and the Phoenix stays alive.
And that's a really good engage. Look, Lasbra, I'm going to throw him under the bus. He's 8-0-5. He's obviously having a great game.
Yeah, I think he's just going to stand right back up after the bus runs him over.
Right. I mean, he has no issues right now. But that Phoenix defense from the Kings is in part to where he was putting pressure. And specifically, Twig gets out of that engagement pretty easily, and as such didn't have to burn Fear No Evil or anything to get some peel, was able to use that to retaliate onto like Vera. And a little bit of things that go wrong with just the engage there for the Bolts that really paved the way for the Kings. And that is a great tear through. Again, they get 2 tier 1s and a tier 2 on that. That is a good way to notch some gold into their pockets. Because at this point, for the Bolts, I mean, you're talking about, hey, this gold lead is going to upgrade your relics. It's going to finish off your builds. Maybe you sell or upgrade your starters. That's the position that they're in right now. A lot of wards, obviously, are going to be able to come through as well. But if you're the Kings, that, 3,000 gold that you just picked up? 2,500? It feels immensely good in your favor because you're able to finish off some of those items you were struggling with. You're able to get a new tier 1 and finally start putting yourselves closer to that late game state that you really wish your team could be fighting in.
It's big man Tings doing big damage from underneath the right side. Phoenix, I didn't even see what happened to Haddix there, but Netrioid dropped the ultimate onto the Guan Yu and got the kill there. There's a skirmish happening here on right. Haddix is going to use his ultimate, but a wall from Genetics, and those walls have felt maybe a little bit more consistent here, Gore. If you look back a few minutes when we joked about the delay wall that really didn't end up mattering, the walls since then have actually trapped the Bolts in a couple awkward positions. Big man Tings jumped on by Lasbra here. We're at late game Baba Yaga, but how much can it do against an 8-0 Lasbra who is now divine? Not much is the answer. Captain Twig down as well. The Olympus Bolts have found 2 big targets. Now their eyes are on the base.
I mean, being able to knock down just one Phoenix. They already got thwarted on one, so we'll see if they're going to be able to hold on to it here. They might be able to get two at once.
If they get a wipe, this could be game over for the Camelot Kings. NetDruid has to use his ultimate. Underneath the left side, Phoenix he goes, but there's no safety there. Venenu gets the opening kill on this engagement. The Olympus Bolts slow things down and then speed them back up. Variety, the only one alive, as Genetics is elsewhere, working his way in from the left-hand side of the map. The Olympus Bolts, they have the Titan down to half HP. Lasbra dancing on through as Genetics has nothing to say about it. The Olympus Bolts, they do the damage, they do the winning, and they'll take a 2-1 win over the Kings.
I mean, look, there's a lot of things to say. The Kings had really good fight back over that right Phoenix, but for the most part, that one was just textbook Smite from the Bolts. They started it at literally 1 minute, and save for a couple of bumps in the road, they had the same consistent progress throughout the entire game. I mean, we were talking about, 13,000 gold lead at one point? Like, there is something, some things where you're just farming better, you're playing better, you're winning the fights, you're controlling the game. Whether it goes down to the draft or the execution for the Kings, the Bolts just played better Smite in Game 3.
And I think it was like 6 kills in at like 10 or 12 minutes or something like that. And it was only 6 kills, but the gold lead was a few K. We're thinking, wow, it hasn't been that crazy, but the Bolts just knew how to push that advantage here this game, and it does spiral out of control. The Kings show up, but the Bolts put them on down. The Bolts continue their winning ways, 2-0 now in Phase 2 of the SPL. We'll take a quick break, then the desk will break this one down.
That one for himself. Venenu caught in a bad spot as well, and when it rains, it pours. Van actually gonna turn it around. Uh-oh. Excuse me. Sorry, sir. John Queen. Still good in those moments. Then finds 2 from the grave, including a massive shutdown on the Panatom.
Hello, Smite fans, and welcome back to the Smite Pro League, powered by Alienware. And I know it's interesting for you guys to see Mifflin here with me on the desk and not immediately leaving to get in his car, drive to the bank, ideally sell the car so you can afford to start paying some of these beautiful, beautiful people in the Smite game chat what they are owed. At the very least, Mifflin, we do appreciate you, because for you guys in chat, you can just head on over to shop.smiteproleague.com and use code Mifflin for that extra $5 off. I know that it is quite the debt Mifflin is racking himself up for here, but this is a man who's willing to stake his bets on his thought process. And you know what they say, Mifflin, third time's a charm. So maybe next week you can double or nothing.
Here's the thing about U.S. federal law, Taco. You cannot force me in good conscience to back that bet, because I took it under duress. Not only were you pressuring me into it, the entirety of chat, all 13,000 of them, also pressured me, but also production in my ear. I thought they had my back. They had a view of the game, and they told me to take the bet anyway.
Yeah.
That's illegal, bro. That's illegal.
Yeah, I think you just owe the people money.
Yeah, they can hear
Mifflin.
from my lawyer.
And you can afford to buy a lawyer
well,
with everything that's going on between the past couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Is that are you confident? You said you were confident. Is it really duress if you said you were confident?
I never said that.
You said you were very confident
I don't see the
in
proof.
the Amir pick. I even asked you, I was like, oh, poker face 100%. To which you said, yeah, chat, look at me.
Nope.
I know this.
That didn't happen. Why is the camera on me? Taco's the one talking. I'm clearly being targeted here. Don't we have a game to talk about? I feel like the Olympus Bolts won. It says that behind me. We haven't said it yet. Congratulations, Bolt, on your 2-1 victory. Go, do the thing.
I feel like, well, as much as Mifflin is trying to distract us all away from the fact that he owes us a lot of money in chat, friendly reminder again, shop.smiteproleague.com. Code Mifflin can get you all of the primo merch that your little hearts desire. But again, like Mifflin's trying to distract us with the stats of the SPL game, it was, in fact, a pretty fun set between the Olympus Bolts and the Camelot Kings, and a very impressive performance from Lasbra. You know, Mifflin, maybe you could take some tips from Lasbra on the confidence factor.
You think clearly I'm not lacking for confidence if I'm the one that doesn't even make any sense. Congratulations, Lasbra. Great performance on the Circuit, man. I'm not going to bring myself into this. An utter consummate professional. Instead, let's focus on the play on field. Thank God for these clips, and thank God for Lasbra if you're an Olympus Bolts fan.
Yeah, Lasbra just got off to a real tear with this circuit, and it all started in the mid lane as well. Poor Tings just never had a chance to really try and utilize some of that Baba Yaga presence or damage. She was just so suppressed for the vast majority of this game, Mifflin. It just felt like Lasbra was not giving the Camelot Kings a whole lot to work with, and even when we saw a successful Phoenix defense for the Camelot Kings that looked as though it was going to be a promising turn of events, Lasbra just manages to find Tings, and I don't want to call it an anticlimactic ending to this set here, Mifflin, but watching those picks just happen one by one definitely had to hurt for the Kings.
Yeah, Lasbra with a miracle situation, 1 versus 4, was able to defend his own Phoenix and then set up for the pick on the back end with a little bit of help from Haddix. After that, though, you got to talk about this damage output from the guy you're seeing on screen right now, John Salty Bread Akuda. I don't know, man. He's always doing it. Something about the sugar in the bread, I'm sure, makes him firing on all cylinders. I didn't actually know
That's
we had
actually
this
a
bit.
selfie of Bera.
He took this
he
himself.
Took that
but
after
both
this
of his
set.
hands are in the shot.
You see how he's smiling? It's because he just won this set, so that's how you know that this photo just happened.
Up to date.
And then he sent it to production, so we would have it for our death segment.
Oh, well, thanks, Barracuda, for boosting the death segment here. And again, congratulations. Take a peek at that slash line, that immaculate jungler. And it's a line that I'm sure chat's sick of hearing me say, but a team can only be as good as your jungler. And when your jungler is going 9, goose egg, 6, that's pretty good.
And it wasn't even about Lasbra being top of the damage charts as much as it was just him being able to facilitate so much of that map pressure. He was just spinning the Kings in circles across a lot of those team fights and objective controls. And that's kind of just the threat that Circuit's constantly posing. She is just there to hunt your back line. And unfortunately for Tings and Netroid, even Variety at times, we saw some of the presence of these midseason changes. Haddix rushing that breastplate. He just absolutely demolished Unfortunately, Variety underneath his own T1 tower. But joining him was definitely Lasbra, and joining us for the post-game interview is going to be Lasbra. Lasbra, you had one hell of a performance on that Circuit gameplay. Did you expect it to be as dominating as it was for Game 3?
Not necessarily, but Circuit was pretty good into Hui, Baba, and Humbats. So I always had like a few targets to go for, which made it a bit easier.
And during this game, you remember that right side Phoenix siege that just went super south for the team. What is the comms like in that sort of situation for you guys to be able to find that bounce back factor?
I don't really remember. But I think they wanted to go for the Phoenix, and I was like, just wait a bit, let me get pressure on mid, and then I guess they got engaged on or something. And then our calls were just after, like, make sure we don't lose the Phoenix and make sure they don't end. And then luckily we got a kill on Humbats and made it back.
Well, that's always a bit of a relief, I think, especially as a jungler, when you weren't able to be as involved as you probably would have liked to have been. But also, moving forward, you guys now find yourselves tied for that top of the standings alongside the Atlantis Leviathans. Who do you think is going to be your, or do you expect it to be something that you can maintain like pressure control over? Because it's a new season, and it looks like your team has a pretty good grasp on it.
What is the question exactly?
Do you expect to be able to maintain it like top of the standings?
Oh yeah, definitely. We're going for top one this split.
Well, we'll definitely be excited to see how everything goes for you guys as the league shapes up from these mid-season changes. But thank you so much for joining us on the post game, Lasbra, and enjoy the rest of your day with that set victory.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And like we already talked about, or like I just mentioned, the Bolts being at the top of the league right now, they're going to be joined alongside of those Atlantis Leviathans. A tie right now, but only 2 sets in. Still ample opportunity for some of these other teams to kind of show face and give both of these guys a run for their money.
No, I don't think so. No, Olympus Bolts and
well, everybody's
Leviathan's
already got
here.
your money, Mifflin.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just kidding. It's we got a long season ahead of us, chat. Okay. Everything I've said all today has been a joke. Nothing I've said carries any weight. Instead, though, let's take a peek at the schedule. Taco, run that.
Well, the Olympus Bolts will definitely get an opportunity to temporarily see if they can maintain staying tied there alongside Atlantis Leviathans. A very important set between those two teams as Bolts will be taking on the Tartarus Titans on Saturday. Same thing for Atlantis Leviathans. They'll be facing off against the Oni Warriors, and we'll finally get a chance to see how the Warriors and the Titans are faring with some of these mid-season changes, although I'm sure that both those teams bound to do their homework based off the sets that have taken place here today, Mifflin.
You know what, Taco? I'm actually really excited for this Jade Dragons Valhalla Valkyries matchup coming in on Sunday this week. Look, I'm not going to mince any words. Jade Dragons have been stumbling a little bit here at the beginning of Phase 2. Take a loss to the Solar Scarabs, take a loss here today as well. Look, man, if there was ever an opportunity for the Valkyries to put up an upset, maybe it's a Jade Dragon squad that's on the back foot.
Are you going to place a bet?
No, stop trying to make me bet.
I feel like
I got yelled at by Hindu Man. I can't bet anymore. Get the camera off me. Go to Taco.
Well, guys, I don't know if Mifflin is really willing to stake his bets. I'm sure his mind will change by Sunday. He's addicted to it, dude. He's just actually obsessed with trying to gamble his entire career life savings into the abyss and, more importantly, into our pockets, chat. But from all of us here at the studios to all of you guys back at home watching, thank you so much for tuning in for Week 2, Day 1 of the mid-season split change for the SMITE Pro League. And, again, hope you guys all have a fantastic rest of your night. And make sure that you don't place any bets unless it's against Mifflin. Have a good one. See you guys tomorrow.
Peach it?